Chapter 598. Looking at the dumbfounded crowd, Prince Jean curled his lips and said, "What are you waiting for? Do 10 frog jumps around the playground, not one less. If you can't complete it, pack up your things and go back." Your Highness, what is frog jumping?" One of them finally reacted and asked with a trembling voice. Li Han put his hands behind his back, squatted on the ground and jumped twice. He stood up and said, "Do you see? Just like this, jump 10 laps. This is your punishment." He pointed at a few Imperial guards and said, "You guys come here and supervise them." Failure was really terrible. Although it was very shameful to do such strange movements in public, they weren't the only ones who were shameful. Compared to being expelled from the academy, this was nothing. Under the supervision of the Imperial guards, the 21 children of the aristocratic family squatted down one by one and started frog jumping around the playground with a sad face. Li Han curled his lips. 1 lap around the playground was more than 100 meters. After they jumped 1 lap, they couldn't even make this kind of expression on their faces. And the most painful thing was not today, but tomorrow when they woke up. Thinking about that feeling, his legs were still weak. However, the feeling of punishing others to do frog jumps was really not bad. What are they doing? A few days ago, I urged Brother Su to read more books, but he refused in every possible way. "Brother Su, if it weren't for me, you would be the one squatting there jumping around. How does Brother Su intend to thank me? Tonight, I will invite Brother Zhang for a drink at the Jade Courtyard. Please do me the honor." The students who passed the exam naturally didn't have to be so shameful. They pointed at the people who were doing strange movements and chatted with a smile. Prince Jean looked at Li Yi. Seeing him nod, he walked over with his hands behind his back. Everyone saluted him. Not to mention that he was a prince, just his identity as a teacher of the academy made them automatically ignore his age. "Don't be too complacent." Li Han glanced at Li Yi once more before turning back, summoning up his courage to say, "In order for you all to adapt in advance, the academy will arrange some missions for you all. When the time comes, you all might be scattered across the various departments of the imperial court, and those who complete the missions will receive corresponding points. There will be a test every half a year, and those who fail will still not be able to successfully graduate from the academy." The students already understood what the word graduation meant. Not being able to graduate from the School of Mathematics meant that the imperial court did not recognize one's status as a student of the School of Mathematics. Not only would one not be able to become an official, but they would also be wasting their time. No one wanted to end up like this. Being able to successfully pass 2 examinations meant that they had some confidence in their own strength. If they could really enter the royal court and do some work, it would be a process of accumulating experience for them. There would be no harm in doing so. Minister of Revenue Qin Huan stood beside Li Yi and asked, "Li Daren, what does His Highness Prince Jean mean?" "What I mean is, if you encounter any mathematical problems that you can't solve in the future, you can come to the school to borrow people." Li Yi looked at him and said, "Just don't forget to pay them." Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "You are now an important minister of the imperial court. Don't always stink of money. The students of the academy will still have to work for the imperial court in the future. This way, they can improve their resumes. There are many benefits. Why talk about rewards? Thank you for your teachings, Your Majesty. The students of the academy should take the initiative to help the imperial court. Money is just a worldly possession." Li Yi looked like he had learned something. He looked at Emperor Jing and said, "I want to ask Your Majesty for some worldly possessions. I want to dig an artificial lake in the academy to build a more comfortable place for the students to study." "I wonder," Emperor Jing's expression froze. He suddenly pointed to the field and said, "What happened to them?" Everyone looked in the direction he pointed and saw that the students who were jumping happily just now were now paralyzed on the ground. It was not until the imperial guards forced them to move forward a little bit. Li Han came over and explained, "Father, you don't know this. This action looks simple, but it is very painful to persist for a long time." Emperor Jing nodded and said, "In the end, they will have to enter the imperial court to become an official. For such lazy students, we should punish them and make them change their lazy nature. There was a shortage of mathematics talents in the Jing kingdom. The academy could only train about 100 people in the first batch. No one could be easily given up. After admonishing the mathematicians, Jing Di turned around and asked, "Where were we just now?" "Speaking of the artificial lake." Li Yi reminded him. "This Academy of Mathematics, I will leave it to you. Don't let me down." Emperor Jing covered his chest and said, "I am a little tired today. I will return to the palace." "Farewell, Your Majesty." The professors immediately bowed. Nearly 100 students of the Academy of Mathematics lined the road to see them off. Today, they had actually seen the emperor in the flesh. When they returned, they would brag to others. Li Yi's face was full of pity. The stingy old emperor. So many students had done their best for the future of the Jing kingdom, but he could not even satisfy this small request. It was really disappointing. The Academy of Mathematics was very close to the palace. After Emperor Jing walked out of the gate of the Academy of Mathematics, he put his hand down from his chest. His brows relaxed and he said, "The money of the people and nobles in the capital has been earned by them. Now, they have come to ask me for money. The national treasury does not have extra money for them to dig a lake." The Minister of Revenue looked at Emperor Jing and with great difficulty closed his astonished mouth. He opened his mouth again and said, "Yes, the national treasury is tight. It can't withstand any more torment. Return to the palace." Thinking of this, Emperor Jing felt a little annoyed. He waved his hand and stepped onto the dragon carriage. How many laps has it been?" Wang Dan turned his head with difficulty and looked around. Seeing that there were figures crawling with difficulty in front and behind him, he asked weakly. It was only the beginning of February, and it was chilly in spring. His clothes were all soaked in sweat, and his legs were heavy as if they were tied to 2 mountains. Even taking a step forward was very difficult. "There are still 5 laps, an imperial guard behind him said expressionlessly. Thump. Hearing that there were still 5 laps to climb, a sliver of despair rose to Wang Dan's face. The last bit of strength in his body also disappeared. His vision darkened and he fell to the ground. A few steps behind him, the youth surnamed Zheng saw Wang Dan fall and also stopped crawling. His entire body lay on the ground and did not move anymore. "Take them to the dormitory." Li Yi waved his hand. It was already difficult for them to run 10 laps around the 400-meter track, let alone frog jump. Even the palace guards did not have the ability to do this. Rolling and crawling to last 5 laps was already beyond his expectations. In the academy, there were almost no problems for poor students. No one would not cherish this kind of opportunity to reach the sky in one step. Some of the sons of officials and aristocratic families still needed more training. This was a show of strength. He believed that after today, it would be much easier to lead the troops under him. The bodies of the scholars were thin and weak. In the end, no one could last 10 laps before they were carried away by the imperial guards one by one. If I had known earlier, I would have read more books. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gotten such a low score. Yeah, fortunately. Fortunately, he was just scaring us. The 2 young men looked at each other and could see the joy in each other's eyes. Although they had passed the previous exam, they thought that it was safe to enter the Academy of Mathematics. After they returned, they did not even look at the so-called new mathematics textbook. Today's exam paper was like a book from heaven. They scored 1 or even 2 digits lower than the others. It could be said that they stood out from the crowd and earned everyone's attention. A figure walked over from afar. The 2 of them looked at him and hurriedly got up. "Greetings, Your Highness, Prince Jin." Li Han looked at them and asked, "You are Qin Zhong and Chen Hao?" Chapter 599. The Imperial College was the highest educational institution in the Jing Kingdom. The students there were all elites from all over the country, and they were very serious about learning. Today was the first official day of classes. However, the professors from the Imperial College were surprised to find that the students of the Imperial College were very serious and hardworking. They could tell from their attitude in class that they were even better than the students from the Imperial College. Part of the reason was that the academy did not give face to Prime Minister Qin and Minister Chen, making the two children of officials pack up and go home on the first day. The uniformed screams when they went down the stairs should also be one of the reasons. But the most important reason should be that the students restrained themselves, treated learning seriously and diligently. Ding, the bell rang, signaling the end of the morning class. All right, that's all for the morning class. Remember to clean the blackboard. A teacher put down the chalk and walked out of the classroom. Although he had practiced it countless times, he still wasn't used to using the chalk in his hands. However, it had to be said that the chalk made by County Uncle Lee was indeed convenient to use, even though there was no order to it. He flicked the chalk dust off his fingers and washed his hands with water outside before walking unhurriedly in the direction of the dining hall. He had already thought of the main course for lunch. It would be braised beef noodles with 2 extra eggs. It was free for lunch, which was the subsidy given by the Imperial Court to the teachers of the Imperial College. It was illegal to slaughter cattle without permission, so beef couldn't be eaten often. Thus, he decided to eat 2 bowls of noodles with 4 eggs today. Zheng Yin, you, help me clean the blackboard, Wang Dan said weakly as she lay on the table in the classroom. I don't have the strength. As soon as he finished speaking, another feeble voice came from beside him. Wang Dan covered her stomach that had been growling for a long time and said, when are we going to eat? Zheng Yin shook his head and said, there are 10 steps to the dining hall. I'm not going. Wang Dan lived on the 2nd floor of the dormitory. When she thought of the feeling when she went down the stairs this morning, her expression immediately became a little frightened. Then I'm not eating either. 2 students carried large bowls into the classroom and found their seats. They ate and read books at the same time. For students from poor families, educational resources were scarce. Sometimes, just to borrow a book, they would have to travel dozens of miles. Whether it was eating or going to the toilet, they would not let go of any time that they could read. The braised beef noodles were very fragrant. The 2 students were watching 30 years of scientific examination, 50 years of simulation, while slurping the noodles. The fragrance instantly filled the entire classroom. Gulp. Wang Dan started to drool uncontrollably. Beast. Zheng Yin's throat quivered as he cursed in his heart. The 2 of them looked at each other with anger on their faces. The classroom was a place for learning. Did they think it was a cafeteria? The 2 brothers in front. In the end, Wang Dan couldn't help but speak first. After calling them twice, the 2 people in front came back to their senses and asked doubtfully, what can I do for you two? Wang Dan squeezed out a smile and said, can the 2 of you help us buy lunch from the dining hall? The faces of the 2 commoners were filled with difficulty. This round trip would take up at least 2 questions' time. Pa. Wang Dan placed a silver ingot on the table and said, help us buy some food and this silver ingot is yours. Delicious. In front of Wang Dan was a bowl the size of a human head. At this moment, he was slurping on the noodles. Although he wasn't the legitimate son of the Wang family, it was precisely because he wasn't the eldest son that he didn't have to bear much responsibility. He had been pampered since he was young, but right now, he almost cried when he saw this bowl of braised beef noodles. Beside him, Zheng Yin wasn't much better. He had been starving since yesterday. Not to mention a bowl of beef noodles, even if there was a cow in front of him, he naturally wouldn't be able to eat it. The 2 of them raised their heads and looked at each other. Instantly, they had the feeling of brothers going through thick and thin together. It was better to go through thick and thin together than to share riches. After yesterday's incident, the already close relationship between the 2 of them was once again pulled closer. Good brother. Wang Dan took a piece of beef from his bowl and passed it to him. His arms stiffened in midair. He raised his head and asked, why is there so much more beef in your bowl than mine? Hello, Dean. In the courtyard, the young man bowed respectfully to Li Yi, his face full of awe. Wang Yong patted his brother's shoulder and said to Li Yi with a smile, this child has been mischievous since he was young. He has caused trouble for Dean Li, it's no trouble at all. This child is very obedient. Li Yi smiled and patted his brother's head. Wang Yong pointed in a certain direction and said to Wang Dan, "Go over there and wait for a while. I have something to say to Dean Li." The young man nodded obediently. After taking a few steps, he heard laughter coming from a room beside him. When he turned his head to look, his eyes couldn't help but widen. In the room, although young, His Highness Prince Jean, who was very knowledgeable and liked to teach students all day long, was riding on a monster and shaking it with all his might. On his face was a smile that he had never seen before. Haha, faster, faster. Li Han was riding on Pleasant Goat. The guard at the side pushed a thick pole up and down, causing the cart to shake. Li Han laughed loudly. In the next moment, he seemed to realize something. He suddenly raised his head and looked outside the door. When he saw a pair of shocked eyes, the smile on his face froze. Stop. He got off the cart, straightened his clothes, and walked to the door. With a calm expression, he said, "Wang Dan, why are you here?" It's over, it's over." Seeing Mr. Jin's expression, Wang Dan's heart gradually sank. He accidentally saw this side of Mr. Jin. How was he going to live in the academy in the future? In an instant, he felt like he had just escaped from the tiger's mouth and entered the wolf's den. I wonder how big the big business that Brother Li is talking about is? Wang Yong put down his teacup and looked at Li Yi with a smile. It's even bigger than the perfume and liquor business. Li Yi looked at him and said, "I just don't know if the Wang family can handle it." Wang Yong was stunned for a moment. Then, the smile on his face became even brighter. "Brother Li, don't worry. In this world, there is no business that the Wang family can't handle." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Some important matters had been settled with this smile. "Brother Wang, take care." After a while, Li Yi stood at the door and cupped his hands at Wang Yong. "Brother Li, I won't see you out." Wang Yong turned back and smiled. He left with Wang Dan, but the latter's face was a little pale as he left. On the horse, Wang Dan asked his brother in a trembling voice, "Big brother, can I not go to the academy?" "Nonsense." Wang Yong looked at him and said in a low voice, "Father spent so much effort to send you there. How can you let him down like this?" Sigh. Wang Dan sighed as she listened to the nagging. She closed her eyes in despair. In the courtyard, Fang's eyes widened. He held something under the sunlight and looked at it carefully. He asked, "Young master, do you think this broken thing is worth much?" "Broken thing?" Li Yi was also fiddling with something in his hand. After several rounds of continuous improvement, its quality was much better than before. However, since he wanted to perfect it, he could not rush it. For the time being, he decided to experiment for a while longer. If he made some slight improvements, the price would not be as simple as doubling. When he heard old Fang's words, he tossed the item over and asked, "How much do you think this little thing is worth?" "It only costs a few copper coins." "How much can it be worth?" "But it's colorful and pretty." Fang looked at it again and looked at Li Yi. He said uncertainly, "2 taels of silver." Chapter 600. Don't look at me like that again. Li Yi was searching for information in his mind. He looked up and saw that Fang's eyes were as wide as copper bells. He had been staring at him like this for at least a quarter of an hour. Ever since he knew that these pieces of junk could realize his dream of having a beautiful wife, a beautiful concubine, and a big house, he had been staring at him like this. It still doesn't work. Li Yi sighed. The colorless glass had not been baked yet. He had to find a way to remove the metal elements inside. Moreover, there were a lot of bubbles inside, which greatly reduced the visual impact. If he took it outside and said that it was a glass that was gifted by the heavens and was worth tens of thousands of gold coins, not many people would believe it. Improvement, the process had to be improved. Moreover, when the time came to do the modeling, he needed skilled craftsmen, and they had to be his own people. He would not feel at ease leaving it to others. Casually throwing away the defective product in his hand, Fang moved like a hungry dog pouncing on its food and finally saved it before it fell to the ground. However, he fell face first into the mud. Getting up from the ground, he did not even have time to pat the dust off his body. He glared at Li Yi and said, "Young master, what are you doing?" He gently stroked the object in his hand. What was this? This was a house, a concubine, and a dream. Moreover, his dream had changed a few days ago. A big house was no longer a problem for him. If he could live in the palace that the young master mentioned and have dozens of people serving him, how comfortable would that be? Li Yi looked at him and said, "This thing is not that valuable now. Wear it into beads, make it into jewelry, and make some beautiful styles. Tell them to work hard and don't be lazy. We don't have so much time to waste. If anyone dares to be lazy, break his dog legs." Fong carefully put away the thing in his hand and strode outside. In fact, he had been the laziest during this period of time. However, at that moment, he suddenly realized that since the son-in-law had entrusted this task to him, he had to do his best. He couldn't be lazy, he couldn't slack, and he couldn't let down the son-in-law's trust and expectations in him. Although he still had some doubts about whether this thing could be sold for such a high price, his son-in-law wouldn't let him do something meaningless. When he walked out of the door, he saw a few naughty children playing on the sand. He kicked the nearest naughty child's butt and scolded, "Go play somewhere else." In early February, the willow tree by the lake of the Faculty of Mathematics had already begun to sprout. The green jade grew to the height of the tree, and thousands of green ribbons hung down. The lake water was clear, and fish could be seen swimming occasionally. A gentle breeze blew from the surface of the lake. Sitting on the grassland with a small slope, leaning against the willow tree, Renbachian held a copy of 30 Years of Scientific Examination, 50 Years of Simulation. Such a scene was naturally what Li Yi had imagined. Now, there was only a bare grassland. On the other side of the grassland, a few students who didn't finish their homework on time were frog jumping with their hands tied. Further away, there was a crowd of people watching. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. The crowd dispersed and walked quickly to the classroom. Li Han's plump body stood at the door of a classroom. The students who passed by him would greet him respectfully, "Good day, sir." He had a book under his arm. When the bell rang for the second time, he slowly stepped into the classroom. Compared to a few days ago, he was more mature and steady now. He never pretended to be polite in front of the students. No one could associate him with the silly guy who was sitting in the rocking car yesterday afternoon. "Stand up." "Good day, sir." A uniform voice immediately came from the classroom. There were many rules in the Faculty of Mathematics. For example, they had to do morning exercises before class in the morning. The second set of National Primary School radio gymnastics was even more shameful than frog jumping. However, it was set by the dean, who didn't show his face often and had absolute authority in the faculty. No one could violate it. Gymnastics or frog jumping. This was a choice without hesitation. More than 100 rough men dancing awkwardly on the field was, of course, an eyesore. Therefore, after seeing it once, Li Yi didn't want to see it again. When the Faculty of Mathematics was recruiting students, he didn't think of getting some female students in. Although it was impossible to let them attend class together, it would be good to see them from afar after class. Otherwise, in a certain kind of upper-class society, Li Yi would really be worried that there would be a scandal in the student dormitory if he didn't see any women all year round. That would also make him lose face as the dean. However, the possibility of this proposal being passed wasn't high. Although the situation of women in the capital city had changed a lot, it wasn't to the extent that adult men and women could study together in the same classroom. On one side of the Faculty of Mathematics was the Jing Kingdom Girls' School that was still under construction. On the other side was the Science Faculty that had already been completed and would soon open. Forget about the Science Faculty, there definitely wouldn't be women. However, the Princess Royal Highness Girls' School was different. When the time came, they could organize some superficial exchanges between the students of the two Faculty of Mathematics. In time, they could change the unhealthy habits in the hearts of some of the Faculty of Mathematics. Inside the classroom, Li Han was writing something on the blackboard. He wasn't tall enough, so Li Yi asked the carpenter to specially make a step for him. This kid was born to do mathematics, especially when there was no need for advanced mathematics. In the past year, he had already mastered elementary mathematics to a certain level. The students of the Faculty of Mathematics were actually much easier to teach and manage than the students of the future. Everyone was an adult, and they were adults with terrifying self-awareness. Those who could pass the admission exam didn't lack a foundation in mathematics. What they lacked was the ability to change and guide their thinking. For them, they were already familiar with Arabic numerals. Now, they were gradually changing their traditional thinking. The few mathematics PhDs taught different subjects. Elementary algebra and elementary geometry were currently the main subjects of study. Li Han didn't teach these. In his words, he didn't want to teach these things that were only for children. He was the only teacher in the entire Faculty of Mathematics who could teach application of mathematics. The course Application of Mathematics involved specific problems. For example, how to determine the specific number of chickens and rabbits in cages without any indescribable incidents. For example, how to use shadows to measure the height of the Hall of Diligent Government without climbing to the roof. For example, how long would it take for the soldiers of the Jing Kingdom to catch up with the soldiers of the Qi Kingdom who could travel 80 kilometers in a day during a march to a war? And so on, and so on. Where there is a loan, there is a loan. Where there is a loan, there must be an equal loan. Li Han wrote these words on the blackboard, then pointed at someone below and said, "Wang Dan, can you explain to me what I meant by what I said in the last lesson?" A young man stood up helplessly and said, "Sir, if there's a loan, there must be a loan. If there's a loan, there must be a loan. If there's a loan, there must be an equal one. This is the basic rule of the debit and credit bookkeeping method." The specific content is, the young man explained the concept clearly. Li Han nodded in satisfaction and said, "You said it well. Sit down." He turned around and said, "Today, we will use a few specific examples to explain what the debit and credit bookkeeping method is all about." Li looked out the window. Li Han had already stepped onto the stairs. He was waving his short arms and writing something on the blackboard. It was hard to imagine that he was only 10 years old. If he continued to develop like this, it wouldn't be long before he could enjoy a peaceful retirement. Hurry up and grow up. Li Yi looked at the figure in the classroom and thought to himself. Chapter 601. As Li Yi flipped through the account books at home, Li Xian stood in front of him with a haggard face. The Academy of Sciences was about to open, but he hadn't even solved the problem of military provisions. It would be strange if he wasn't anxious. "Take it." Li Yi took out a book from the drawer and threw it at him. He had paid the price of a pimple by staying up late to write it. It was all about the ideas of modern military provisions and the specific production methods. As for the problem of sealing, it was also described in detail. Some modern methods couldn't be realized, and the methods that could be adopted were very limited. Fortunately, it wasn't impossible. As long as one found the right direction and overcome one or two technical difficulties, it would be fine. This was not a difficult task for Li Xian, who had a lot of skilled craftsmen under him. Not long after, Li Xian walked out of the room with a relaxed expression. However, he was pulled over by the proud Lolita who was guarding outside the door. She glanced into the room and said in a low voice, "Brother Xian, I want to ask you something. Don't lie to me." "What is it?" Li Xian looked puzzled. The proud Lolita pulled him to the corner and asked, "Sir, were you kidnapped by Sister Rui to get married?" Li Xian looked at her and said, "Why are you asking this? Just tell me." The proud Lolita twisted her body and said. Li Xian nodded and asked again, "Yes, what's wrong?" "It's really a bride kidnapping." The proud Lolita first widened her eyes. After glancing into the room again, she narrowed her eyes and looked thoughtful. Recently, the atmosphere in the court was a little depressed. The news revealed by the Imperial Physician Bureau showed that His Majesty's health was deteriorating, and the situation was not optimistic. An emperor was terrible, but an emperor who was about to reach the end of his life was even more terrible. This kind of terror was directly reflected in the recent iron-blooded measures taken by the Intelligence Division. Last time, the case of the Assistant Minister of Justice's corruption had involved a total of 100,000 taels of silver. It was a rare case of corruption in recent years. The Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, was still locked up in the Supreme Court. Over the past few days, he had confessed to many people. Even 2 fifth-rank officials were involved. They were all purged by the Secret Intelligence Division. For a time, everyone in the imperial court felt insecure. Of course, there were different levels of danger. Among them, the ones who were the most terrified were naturally the King of Shu. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, had always been in close contact with the King of Shu. Naturally, the friends he befriended were also officials in the King of Shu's faction. Unfortunately, after he was caught for corruption, His Majesty issued an imperial edict that if he confessed to one person, his punishment would be reduced by a bit. It was said that Sir Zhao's punishment had already changed from beheading to 530 years in prison. If he worked harder and confessed to a few more of the country's vermin, he might still have a chance to see the light of day again in his lifetime. As a result, some officials in the King of Shu's faction had their properties confiscated and their properties sent to the national treasury. It was roughly estimated that in a few months, there were at least hundreds of thousands of taels of silver in the national treasury. His Majesty was obviously not satisfied with this. This time, he seemed to be determined to investigate the corrupt officials in the capital. This time, the Imperial Censorate was ordered to check the accounts of the yamen and departments to find the corrupt officials one by one. As soon as this order was issued, many officials in the capital panicked. 300,000 taels of silver is still far from enough. Jing Di drank a mouthful of snow pear soup and said with a frown. The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, sighed and said, just like the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, who embezzled 100,000 taels of silver but did not dare to spend a penny. This is the only example. The few people he confessed had already squandered all the money they had embezzled. The remaining figures are just the figures obtained after calculating their properties when the Secret Intelligence Unit was ordered to confiscate their properties. Father, the accounts of the inner mansion have been verified. Sitting on the side, Li Han, who had been lowering his head and fiddling with the abacus, suddenly put down the abacus and stretched. So fast? Jing Di asked in surprise. Li Han smiled embarrassedly and fiddled with the abacus. He said, Sir's abacus is easy to use. The accounts of the inner mansion are clear. It doesn't take much effort. Jing Di nodded. The inner mansion was the department that managed the expenses of the palace and the royal family. Under his supervision, it was indeed unlikely that there would be any big mistakes. Previously, when they checked the accounts, the 3 of them needed at least 5 days to finish checking all the accounts. However, from the time Han started fiddling with the abacus, it had only been less than 4 hours, right? He wanted to ask a few more questions, but a eunuch outside the door reported that Deputy Minister Ma of the Imperial Censor was asking for an audience. The Imperial Censor had just received his order yesterday to check the accounts of all the yamens in the capital. Deputy Minister Ma must have come for this matter. Jing Di waved his hand and said, Enter. Deputy Minister Ma walked in from outside. He first bowed to Jing Di and then said, The Imperial Censor has been ordered by His Majesty to check the accounts of all the yamens in the capital. However, the Imperial Censor's attainments in mathematics are not high. In order to complete His Majesty's task as soon as possible, I would like to ask His Majesty for an edict to borrow a few students from the arithmetic school to assist the Imperial Censor in checking the accounts. A certain headmaster had once said that if the imperial court needed the help of the students of the School of Mathematics, they could just speak up. Things like auditing accounts should be left to those who specialized in mathematics. As for the Imperial Censorate, it was enough for them to act as a supervisor. Approved. Jing Di glanced to his side and said, Han, you can choose some students from the arithmetic school to assist the Imperial Censor. Li Han raised his head and said, Father, the students of the arithmetic school have to go out for an internship to help the court and earn credits. It must be signed by the director himself. Hearing this, Jing Di waved his hand at Deputy Minister Ma and said, in that case, you can go find Li Yi yourself. Deputy Minister Ma could only helplessly retreat after hearing this. The reason why he came to see His Majesty first was that he was worried that County Uncle Li would ask for an exorbitant price and ask for a huge reward from them. The imperial censor was a well-paid yeoman. The imperial censors were all poor. How could they have any reward to pay them? He sighed. Since His Majesty said so, he could only try his luck first. Borrow people? After listening to Deputy Minister Ma in front of him, Li Yi nodded and said, "How many people do you want?" Deputy Minister Ma looked at him and asked tentatively, "Director Li, how should we calculate the reward for the students?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "They have the opportunity to contribute to the court. That is their duty. There is no need to talk about rewards." Deputy Minister Ma was stunned for a moment. When he looked at Li Yi again, he immediately felt a deep sense of guilt. County Uncle Li was a real gentleman. He had guessed him before. He really gauged the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. He shouldn't have. "I only need 10 people. Deputy Minister Ma cupped his hands and said, "It's not good to leave one. I will round it up and give you 11. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Leave one?" Deputy Minister Ma looked at him doubtfully. "It's not important." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "In short, I will give you 11 people." Deputy Minister Ma gave 11 people. Deputy Minister Ma felt even more guilty. He looked ashamed and cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Director Li. I will definitely put in a good word for Director Li in front of His Majesty." Deputy Minister Ma, "You are too polite." Li Yi smiled and said, "It's what we should do to earn your salary and share your worries." Chapter 602. There was something wrong with Feng the past few days. He always looked a little too excited. Li Yi noticed that his eyes were shining when he looked at the pile of sand at the entrance. Something was wrong with the arrogant Lolita too. Li Yi noticed that her eyes were shining when she looked at him. Feng's illness was incurable. He probably thought that money was floating in the sky. As for the arrogant Lolita, it was hard to guess what a girl was thinking. Li Yi didn't want to guess. At least for now, she hadn't made any further moves. He had to teach Li Han how to use the debit and credit bookkeeping method. After all, this was the first internship for the students of the School of Mathematics. They had to make some achievements so that they wouldn't be looked down upon by the imperial court. Accounting was broad and profound. Tax evasion and falsification were all inseparable from this line of work. If they were to learn these things systematically, the School of Mathematics would have to open a new accounting major. It would take 4 years for undergraduate students and 3 years for postgraduate students to be able to produce a few experts in this field. Although the little fatty was a genius, he had only learned how to use the debit and credit bookkeeping method to check the accounts. However, it was enough for him. He couldn't use the more profound methods at the moment. This world still used the very unscientific accounting method of keeping accounts. Keeping accounts by date made it very troublesome to check the accounts. If one wanted to falsify the accounts and take advantage of loopholes, it couldn't be any easier, and it wouldn't be easy for the higher-ups to find out. Since the old emperor was determined to fight against corruption this time, he would give him a big wave. Using this method to check the accounts, no small fly could hide from the big tiger. While Li Yi was explaining the details to Monarch Jean, the arrogant Lolita was sitting on a small stool not far away. She supported her chin with one hand and blinked her eyes as she watched. After a while, she put down her arms and clenched her fists. She murmured, "If I still don't marry him when I'm 18, I'll snatch him." After lunch, many students of the School of Mathematics gathered under the high wall where the results were posted. They were discussing something in low voices. This time, the wall wasn't posted about the exam rankings. It was about something else. The imperial censorate had been ordered by the emperor to investigate the accounts of the various yamen in the capital. They had borrowed a dozen students from the School of Mathematics and Mathematics. The names of the students who had been lucky enough to be chosen were pasted on the paper. Chen Lisan, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, Li Jianren, Tsing Zijian. After looking at the names on the list, many people immediately sighed. and their expressions were slightly gloomy. It turned out that the principal's words weren't just empty words. The students of the academy could familiarize themselves with the bureaucracy and accumulate experience by going out for an internship. At the same time, they could also establish a foundation in the Ministry of Personnel, which would greatly benefit their future prospects. This time, assisting the Imperial Censorate in auditing the accounts was the first opportunity for an academy student to participate in an internship. Those who were lucky enough to be selected would be able to obtain enough credits after the internship. These credits were very important as they would determine whether or not they could successfully graduate from the Mathematics Academy in the future. If they missed this opportunity, they could only wait for the next one. Chen Lisan, Qin Feng. Sigh, all of them. Don't tell me that there's no chance for us poor students. Shoo, Brother Su, be careful with your words. This is only the first time. We will have more chances in the future. The students from poor families discussed in low voices, and there were inevitably times when they sighed. There was no other reason other than the fact that the 11 people on the list were all from aristocratic families, and none of them were poor students. Compared to those people, the opportunities for poor students were pitifully few. Now that Deanley was finally willing to do something for the poor students, they didn't expect that even the precious opportunity to go out for an internship would be treated so unfairly. A student from a poor family sighed and said, "The principal has already done enough for us. Not only did he let us study here, he even applied for a living allowance from the imperial court. For this, he has already offended too many powerful officials. We cannot make things difficult for him anymore. Yes, we are indebted to little Deanley. We are poor students, so we definitely cannot do anything to make things difficult for him. Isn't that ungrateful?" Another student from a poor family said righteously. "This matter ends here, no further discussion is allowed. If you have the energy, go back and do a few more sets of simulation scrolls." A sound of agreement came from the crowd, and they quickly dispersed, returning to their respective classrooms. On the other side, under a willow tree, several figures gathered together, and their expressions were not very good. After a moment of silence, someone was finally the first to speak. "That surnamed Lee would definitely not give such a good thing to us, and it just had to be the 11 of us, not one more, not one less. There must be a trick in this." Chen Lisan raised his head and said coldly. "That's right." Qin Feng nodded, and then said, "Qin Zhong and Chen Hao have already been eliminated by him. We have become a thorn in his side, a thorn in his flesh. This must be another plot of his." Cui Shixin was the calmest and most composed of them all. After thinking for a moment, he opened his mouth and said, "But, this matter of checking the accounts was ordered by His Majesty to supervise the Imperial Censorate. That surnamed Li has no right to interfere. We are only accompanying the Imperial Censorate to check the accounts. I really can't think of any conspiracy he could have." Shixin is right, I also can't think of any conspiracy in this. Another young man said, "Moreover, this is indeed an opportunity for us, we can't let it go easily." The person who spoke was Xing Zijian, whose father was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Among them, he could be regarded as a wise man. Cui Shixin and Xing Zijian's words were soon agreed by the others. The reason why they came to the arithmetic college was that they were not valued in their own families. The future master of the Chen family was Chen Lijun, not Chen Lisan. The Qin family had Qin Yu, and Qin Feng could not stand out. The Cui family naturally had nothing to do with Cui Shixin. Although they had powerful families behind them, they still had to fight for their own future. As for Xing Zijian, although he was the eldest son of the Xing family, the Xing family was just a new family in the capital city. More than 10 years ago, it was involved in a big case. All the men of the eldest branch were killed, and the women entered the musical house. The second branch gradually rose in recent years because of the relationship with the king of Shu. One person gritted his teeth and said, "Even if there is a conspiracy, we are not necessarily afraid of him. The matter of checking the accounts is sensitive. If he really does something, His Majesty will not spare him." Chen Lisan nodded and said, "Yes, we might as well go and have a look. If there is really something fishy, then he is courting death." Everyone readily agreed, and there was no longer any worry in their hearts. Chapter 603. I'll leave the accounts to you. The two censors cupped their hands in obeisance to the three young men in front of them and said with a smile. Behind them, more than 10 palace guards stood solemnly. The three young men were dressed like scholars and had folding fans tied around their waists. They looked high-spirited, but there was a square object hanging on the other side, which looked a bit strange. You two are too polite. This is what we should be doing. Cui Shixin smiled and cupped his hands together. One of the censors smiled and said, "Time is of the essence. Let's talk as we go." "Please." Cui Shixin extended his hand. They were ordered by the emperor to investigate the accounts. Cui Shixin and the others were divided into 4 groups of 3. At this time, the 3 of them were going to a county in the suburbs near the capital. Although there were 2 imperial censors in charge of this trip, the status of these 3 people was not ordinary. The 2 imperial censors did not dare to put on airs. Moreover, the deputy prime minister had already instructed them to show sufficient respect to the students of the Calculation Academy. Qin County was a small county less than 50 miles away from the capital. It was neither too close nor too far away. Although it wasn't as rich as Jing County, it was still near the capital. It wasn't rich, but it wasn't poor either. At this time, in the government office of Qin County, the county magistrate was pacing back and forth in the hall. His face showed a hint of anxiety. After a while, he raised his head and asked, "Are they coming today?" A middle-aged man with a mustache walked out and said, "Sir, according to the news from the capital, the investigation this time will start from a few counties in the suburbs near the capital. Qin County will be the first to bear the brunt. There should be people arriving today." County Magistrate Zhao looked up at him and asked, "Advisor Ma, do you think this time is safe?" Advisor Ma smiled and said, "Sir, don't worry. That person is an expert in accounting. He does things flawlessly. Even the emperor can't find anything wrong with the account books in his hands." Advisor Ma looked at him and asked, "Sir, did you forget that there were also censors who came to investigate the accounts before the new year? They stayed in the household for 3 days, but in the end, they found nothing." Hearing this, County Magistrate Zhao was finally relieved and said, "That's true. Those useless imperial censors are far from being able to investigate our accounts." As soon as he finished speaking, a yamen runner came forward to report that the useless imperial censor of the capital had arrived. "Please, sirs. I've been waiting for you for a long time." County Magistrate Zhao greeted them with a smile and cupped his hands. Even though his rank was higher than these 2 censors, they came from above, so he naturally had to be courteous. One of the imperial censors said, "We have come to Qin County on the orders of His Majesty to examine the accounts of the yamen. Please cooperate, County Magistrate Zhao." "Of course I'll cooperate." County Magistrate Zhao smiled and said, "A few days ago, an imperial censor came to investigate, but since it is the order of His Majesty, we naturally have to fulfill our duties. 2 sirs, please follow me." When County Magistrate Zhao led the 2 censors to the house, he looked back at the 3 young men behind him and asked in confusion, "These 3 are?" "He's a student who came along to audit the accounts," one of the imperial censors explained. County Magistrate Zhao nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He just felt that these 3 people were strange no matter how he looked at them, and a faint sense of foreboding arose in his heart. "All the accounts of last year are here." County Magistrate Zhao brought them to the house and pointed at several thick books on the table. He sneered in his heart. These things looked big, and it was impossible to finish reading them in a short time. Cui Shixin put down the abacus and said, "County Magistrate Zhao, please prepare some writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone." "Okay." County Magistrate Zhao responded and said, "Advisor Ma, did you hear that? Hurry up and prepare." Writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstone were all prepared. According to the rules, as a county magistrate, he had to avoid arousing suspicion. County Magistrate Zhao said with a smile, "You guys take your time to check, I'll leave first." When he walked out of the door, he saw that the three strange people had already spread out the white paper. They were fiddling with a square object pierced with beads and writing something on the paper. The corner of his mouth twitched, and he strode out. Walking to the yard, he glanced at the 2 rows of imperial guards outside the door and ordered the advisor, "You guys have worked hard on the audit. Advisor, go to Spring Fragrance Restaurant and order a table of good wine and food. Ask them to send it over at mealtime." In the house, hearing the crackling sound, the 2 censors looked at each other, picked up their teacups and took a sip. They walked over to have a look and then came back to have a sip of tea. This was truly an easy mission. 23 RD of July, by 5 cut rice paper. Cui Shixin glanced at the account book in his hand and opened another one. After comparing, he sneered and said, 100 taels. 5 cut rice paper for 100 taels. Is the rice paper of County Magistrate Zhao's family made of silver? He picked up the brush and wrote a few words on the paper. A young man opposite him also moved and said with a smile, "There are some here too. The difference between the loans is too big. It's too naive to think that such a clumsy method can fool us." The 2 censors were stunned for a moment and then immediately put down their teacups. "So fast? I also found 2 here." The last young man smiled and said, "Hurry up and work, and you can go back earlier. I'll treat you to dinner at Drunken Moon Restaurant tonight." "That's great." The 2 of them laughed, and the crackling sounds of their hands became even louder. County Magistrate Zhao sat in the back hall for 2 hours. He couldn't get rid of the bad feeling in his heart. In annoyance, he walked to the front hall. Just as he stepped out of the door, he saw the 2 censors and the 3 young men coming out of the house. He was stunned for a moment and then immediately greeted them with a smile. He couldn't even finish reading half of the account book in 2 hours. So, the checking of the account books was actually just a formality? It seemed that he had worried for nothing. The smile on his face was even brighter. He walked forward and said, "You must be tired from checking the account books. I've just asked people to prepare a banquet. You might as well eat before you leave. Otherwise, it will be my negligence." The censor looked at him coldly and said, "Arrest him." While County Magistrate Zhao was stunned, the 2 imperial guards had already pressed his shoulders. County Magistrate Zhao immediately shouted, "What are you doing?" "What are we doing?" The censor sneered and threw a few pieces of paper on his face. He said, "Zhao Bin, in 1 year, 7,000 taels of silver have been embezzled by you." Hearing this, County Magistrate Zhao's body shook violently. When his eyes swept over the papers on the ground, his expression was extremely frightened and then immediately turned pale. "Thank you 3 for today." A censor cupped his hands to Cui Shixin and the other 2 and said, "When we return to the capital, we will definitely ask for your merit in front of His Majesty." "Thank you very much, Your Excellencies." Cui Shixin smiled and cupped his hands. A trace of a smile also appeared on the faces of the 2 behind him. That Li Yi really didn't have any conspiracy and gave them such a great merit for nothing. Could it be that he was showing goodwill to them and His Highness, the King of Shu? Dream on. Fong was really possessed. He thought that he could throw mountains of gold and silver at him one by one just because he had mastered the method of turning sand into colored glass. He didn't know that the rarer something was, the less valuable it was. If there were too many of them, they wouldn't be valuable anymore. He could only take advantage of the beginning to make a huge profit, mercilessly smashed Fong's dream. When he turned around, he saw the proud Lolita sitting at the door and looking at him. Li Yi walked over and looked at her. He asked, "Why do you keep looking at me these days? How do you know that I'm looking at you if you don't look at me?" The proud Lolita glanced at him and hummed a little tune, leaving him with an extremely cool back view. Li Yi stared blankly in a certain direction until her figure disappeared. Then he slowly withdrew his gaze. Could it be that the age of 12 was the dividing line between a Lolita and a young girl? The proud Lolita who had just turned 12 seemed to be becoming more and more feminine. Chapter 604. The county magistrate of Qin County had embezzled nearly 10,000 taels of silver in 1 year. He was caught red-handed by the imperial guards and escorted to the capital. Wang County. One of the imperial censors cupped his hands in salute to the county magistrate and smiled. Magistrate Shui is an honest and upright official. You are truly a role model for our officials. These accounts are clear and there are no problems. It is my duty. You flatter me. Magistrate Shui smiled. We still have duties to perform and will not stay here any longer. Farewell. The censor said to the county magistrate and turned to the 3 young men behind him. Let's go. I will see you out. County magistrate Shui escorted those people to the door. When the 2 censors turned around, he nodded to one of the young men in an unnoticeable manner. Qinghe County. 3,000 taels of silver in half a year. Magistrate Wei, you are very capable. The censor named Wan Su looked coldly at the magistrate and waved his hand. Arrest him. They had just checked the accounts of Qinghe County and found that there was a deficit of 3,000 taels of silver. The accounts involved were all handled by this magistrate. According to the emperor's decree, anyone who embezzled more than 1,000 taels of silver could be arrested on the spot and escorted to the capital. Magistrate Wei was pressed on the shoulders by 2 imperial guards. He looked at a young man behind him and said loudly, I recognize you. Zheng family. You are from the Zheng family. Didn't I reject your offer? How dare you frame me like this? I will definitely seek justice from the emperor. Take him away. Wan Su snorted. The students from the Abacus Academy had been ordered by the emperor to help them check the accounts. In reality, they were no longer helping. Without them, the mission would not have gone so smoothly. The deficit accounts were clearly displayed. No matter what personal grudges they had, corruption was corruption and there was no way to argue against it. Courting death. Seeing Magistrate Wei being escorted away, Zhang Zijian's mouth twitched. He held the abacus in one hand and followed the others out of the county government. Within a day, 3 officials were escorted to the capital for corruption. The officials in the counties near the capital were in a state of panic. The people in the yamen of the capital who had not been found finally began to panic. Every year, the imperial court would send people to check the accounts, but in reality, there were very few results. How could those who had the guts to make a fuss about the accounts be found out so easily? However, this time, His Majesty seemed to be serious. He asked the students of the Divination Academy to help him check the accounts. The imperial court had not been able to find anything for many years. Once they got involved, everyone knew that such a thing would happen because of those students. Bastards, this is how they work for the imperial court. In the hall of diligent government, Emperor Jing slammed the table with a gloomy expression. In just one day, he had uncovered a case that involved tens of thousands of taels of silver. The national treasury was in a tight spot, and in recent days, he had been meticulously calculating every single coin he had. However, he did not expect that these officials would be so daring in corruption. If even the capital was like this, then what would the situation be like in even more remote places? Where did all the funds allocated by the imperial court go? How many people falsified the annual tax accounts in various places? Your Majesty, please take care of your body. Don't get angry. Changde stood behind him and pressed one hand on Emperor Jing's back as he spoke slowly. At this moment, Prime Minister Qin stood up and bowed. Your Majesty, in this old minister's opinion, the matter of checking the accounts can no longer be done. Check. Why can't we check it? Emperor Jing slammed the table and said coldly, I want to see how many more vermin like them are in front of me. Prime Minister Qin looked up, sighed, and silently returned to his original position. It was necessary to check the accounts. Every year, the imperial court sent imperial censors to check everywhere. They would always catch some vermin, which was also a kind of deterrence for other officials. However, it was said that officials should be honest and clean, but how many of them could really live up to these words? He had already understood the method of checking the accounts of the students of the academy. In this way, almost all the officials' accounts would be exposed in broad daylight. How much of a shock would this cause to the entire imperial court and the whole world? If they really did as His Majesty said and thoroughly checked, I'm afraid, the country would no longer be a country. Emperor Jing looked down at the dozen people below and asked, "Dear ministers, what else do you want to say?" No one, including the 2 prime ministers and the 6 ministers, answered. They were all old foxes in the officialdom. This time, His Majesty was clearly determined to eliminate a group of people. If they raised objections at this time, didn't it mean that they had a guilty conscience? Moreover, during this period of time, His Majesty's actions had become more and more resolute. He was autocratic and even refused to listen to advice. Even if most of the edicts were for the Jing kingdom and the world, his methods were still too tough. If it was not handled well, the entire imperial court would be shaken. In the academy, Chen Lisan, Cui Shixin, and the others had just returned. They all looked happy and high-spirited. Our luck is really bad. Why are you the only ones who found out? Li Jianren looked a little depressed and said with a sigh. The other 3 groups all had gains today. Only they did not find any big mistakes in the accounts, so they returned empty-handed. Cui Shixin smiled and said, "It's okay. I'm afraid it will take a long time to check the accounts. Your luck won't always be so bad." At this time, Seng Zijian suddenly looked at Cui Shixin and asked, "The county magistrate of Wang County?" Cui Shixin looked at him and said, "He's an uncle in the family." They looked at each other and smiled. They both understood something from each other's eyes. This time, we can finally hold our heads high. Chen Lisan smiled and couldn't help but show a proud expression on his face. Before today, they did not even think that they would have such a big harvest from the accounts. Those imperial censors were all decorations. As long as they did not make it too obvious, this was completely a feast for them. When he thought about the faces of those people at home, he couldn't help but feel extremely happy. The other students of the academy looked at them with envious expressions as they walked past them. They had already heard about what happened today. In terms of ability, they far surpassed these people, but they had no chance. They could only watch as the credit fell on their heads, the Qin family. In a certain room, a woman said with a worried expression, "I wonder how Feng is doing. He hasn't been home for a few days. How is he going to take care of himself?" The middle-aged man sitting at the table said, "Madam, don't worry. He is no longer a child. He can take care of himself. As parents, we can't give him anything. We can only rely on him to earn everything." The woman sighed and said, "Fortunately, His Majesty values the Mathematics Academy very much. After Feng comes out from there, go and beg father to find a good job in the court. It's true that Qin Yu is the young master of the Qin family, but my Feng also has the blood of the Qin family flowing in his body." "I understand." The middle-aged man pondered for a moment and nodded. The room remained silent for a moment before the woman said, "Will His Majesty investigate the accounts this time? Will he find you?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "It's just a small matter. Catching a few county magistrates is enough. This matter involves a lot of people. His Majesty's order is only temporary and won't last long. If this goes on, the court will be in chaos in a few days. When that time comes, it will stop and we won't be able to find a place like the 6 ministries. This matter has nothing to do with us." The middle-aged man raised his head and said, "It's not easy to enter the academy. Otherwise, I would have sent someone to tell Feng not to participate in this matter. Even if the Imperial Censorate hid the identity of those people, it would not be able to withstand the investigation. If he really has the opportunity to become an official in the future, I'm afraid it will be a disaster and not a blessing." Chapter 605. Young Master, the Imperial Court seems to be checking some accounts recently. They have found more than a dozen corrupt officials. Everyone is talking about it. Should we also check the accounts of the shops? Feng walked into the room from outside and asked Li Yi. "No need." Li Yi bowed his head and said, waving his hand as he was busy. The accounts of the shops were checked every month. They had been taught how to check the accounts. Maybe someone could take a little advantage, but it was unlikely for a slightly larger amount to happen. He's not one of us. He might have other intentions, Fong said with some worry. What should be checked has been checked. Nothing can be found even if you check again. Instead, it will make others think more, which will do more harm than good. Li looked up and said, if it were you, would you be willing to be checked all day? Okay then. Fong thought about it and felt that it made some sense. He was also uncomfortable to be suspected by his wife for hiding money all day long. If you are really greedy and someone comes to check you, what will you do? Fong glanced at Li Yi and said, young master, I don't hide money. You can't say that. I didn't say that you hid money to buy jewelry for Xiaohong. Li Yi waved his hand and said, I mean, if you are a shopkeeper of a shop and someone comes to check you because you are greedy, what will you do? That depends on how much I am greedy, Fong thought about it and said. Thousands of taels? Thousands of taels? Fong curled his lips and said, can thousands of taels be called greedy? He almost forgot that this guy's current net worth couldn't be measured by common sense. He asked again, hundreds of thousands of taels? Hundreds of thousands of taels. Fong looked at Li Yi and suddenly laughed. If hundreds of thousands of taels are found out, won't it be fatal? If it were me. A sinister smile appeared on Fong's face. He slowly raised a hand and made a gesture of cutting his neck. The county magistrate of Qin County had all his property confiscated, his official position removed, and he was sent to prison. The magistrate of Qinghe County had the same treatment as him. Later, 2 officials who were found to have embezzled tens of thousands of taels would probably lose their heads. His Majesty had just flown into a rage in the Golden Hall. Prime Minister Qin and several ministers had advised to stop the audit of the accounts and had been scolded. His Majesty's action directly indicated that the audit of the accounts would not be stopped for a while. This also meant that many people would be unlucky. Prime Minister Qin, this is absolutely wrong. After the morning court, Prime Minister Qin walked out of the main hall. A middle-aged official followed behind him and said anxiously, purging all the corrupt people in the Qing dynasty cannot be so eager for quick success. If His Majesty continues to be so radical, the imperial court will fall into chaos in less than half a month. His Majesty has made up his mind. No one can persuade him. To be careful, the minister said. Prime Minister Qin, Master. Seeing Prime Minister Qin leave, the middle-aged official's face flashed with a trace of undetectable gloom. He walked out of the palace gate, got on a carriage, and said in a low voice, investigate. A sound came from outside the carriage. Someone was walking away. Who is it? Find them immediately. We can't let them investigate any further. Send people to Qin County, Wang County, and Qinghe County to inquire, find a way to make them stop. If necessary, don't hesitate to. The same gloomy voice sounded in some parts of the capital. The Imperial College was different from the Imperial College. It implemented a semi-closed management. There were 5 days of classes and 2 days of rest. During these 5 days, no student was allowed to leave the college unless there was a mission. Today was the day of rest that they had been waiting for. The students were free to go out and visit their relatives and friends, or go to the brothel to have some fun. It was their freedom. When Qin Feng stepped into the Qin family's gate again, he finally felt a sense of relief. Young master, slow down. Qin Yu walked out of the mansion with a few green-clothed servants following behind him, cautiously reminding him of this. Qin Yu glanced at Qin Feng before shifting his gaze and brushing past him. Trash. Qin Feng watched the young master of the Qin family walk past him. When the few of them walked away, he whispered. In the mansion, the person he disliked the most was this young master of the Qin family, who had a tarnished reputation and almost lost the face of the Qin family. However, this person was the eldest son of the Qin family. In the end, the Qin family would be handed over to this person. Qin Feng gritted his teeth and secretly spat in a certain direction. He strode into the mansion. Feng, you're back. How are you in the academy? Are you used to the food and living here? A middle-aged woman came out from the courtyard and grabbed his arm. I'm used to the food and living here, Qin Feng said with a smile. Mother, let's go in and talk. Prime Minister Qin had a prosperous family. He had a total of 5 sons, 3 of which were officials in the court. The eldest son of the Qin family was considered to be the one most likely to take over Prime Minister Qin's position. However, because he lost a game in the court, he was transferred away from the center of power. Now, although Prime Minister Qin was still supporting the family, the Qin family's decline was obvious. Today was the Qin Manor's monthly family banquet. Although Qin Feng also had the qualifications to participate in the family banquet, in the past, he could only sit in the corner. As for the topic of the banquet, it had nothing to do with him. Feng, how are you doing in the academy? I heard that your Dean Li is very powerful. How powerful is he? A voice came from beside him. Qin Feng turned his head and looked over. He casually said a few words and then retracted his thoughts. Sitting beside him was his 5th uncle. Although he was a generation older than him, in terms of presence in the Qin family, he was inferior to him. Because of an incident 2 years ago, he lost all face and became the laughingstock of the capital. Even the servants of the Qin family, who were respectful to him on the surface, were probably mocking him in their hearts. Glancing at Qin Yu, who was sitting very close to the front, a trace of gloominess flashed through his eyes. At this time, Prime Minister Qin's eldest son, Qin Yan, opened his mouth and said, "The Calculation Academy is a good place. If you can successfully graduate from there, your future prospects will be limitless." Qin Zhong. What a pity. Knowing the importance of the Calculation Academy, the Qin family arranged for 2 people in the Calculation Academy, Qin Zhong and Qin Feng. However, Qin Zhong was expelled from the Calculation Academy on the first day. The reason given by the Calculation Academy was very sufficient. Even the Qin family had nothing to say. Qin Zhong lowered his head. At this time, it was better for him not to open his mouth. Qin Yan didn't seem to have any intention of continuing this topic. He thought of something, looked at Qin Feng and asked, "Feng, do you know who the Calculation Academy cooperated with the Imperial Censor to investigate the accounts?" For an official of Qin Yan's level, he actually didn't pay much attention to the events of the past 2 days. The accounts couldn't be traced back to him and the Qin family. He also wouldn't go and provoke the emperor at this time. At this time, he only asked in passing. Qin Feng was just thinking about how to reveal this matter. He really wanted to see the shocked expressions on the faces of his uncles and grandfather. Hearing this, he smiled and said, "Regarding this matter, I'm afraid that uncle will have to repeatedly warn Uncle Feng. Brother Feng has only been an official for 2 years, but his table manners are a bit ugly. If it weren't for me helping him hide it yesterday, uncle might have heard his name in court today." The Uncle Feng he spoke of was Qin Yan's best friend. If it weren't for him raising his hand yesterday, Uncle Feng's son probably wouldn't have had an easy time today. After he finished speaking, he looked at Qin Yan and the other uncles with a slight smile. He even looked at Qin Yu with an obscure gaze. Although his words were a bit tactful, it wasn't hard to guess that the storm that engulfed the entire capital in the past 2 days was caused by them. "What do you mean?" Qin Yan frowned as he looked at him. He seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed and he asked, "Could it be that among the people that assisted the Imperial Censor in investigating the accounts, you were one of them?" Seeing the shocked expressions on the faces of his uncles, including his father, Qin Feng felt extremely carefree in his heart and slightly nodded his head. "It was me. Idiot." Qin Yu raised his head and drank the wine in his cup in one gulp. He glanced at Qin Feng and curled his lips as he spoke. The Qin family's 5th master turned his head and looked at him a few more times. He patted his shoulder, sighed, and turned to leave. Chapter 606. Why? I'm doing things for His Majesty and the Imperial Court. What did I do wrong? Qin Feng stood up with a flushed face and looked angrily at the family elders. Fool, is this something you can interfere with? The Qin clan's fourth master, who was also Qin Feng's father, pointed at him and said angrily, "Do you know how many courtiers you've offended and how many enemies you've made for our Qin clan?" Qin Feng originally thought that he would receive praise from everyone, but he didn't expect to be reprimanded instead. Qin Feng's heart was filled with anger. The Qin clan was Qin Yu's Qin clan, not his Qin clan. His future had to be fought for by himself. This was his opportunity, an opportunity that he couldn't obtain in the clan. He looked straight at his father and said loudly, "This is an order from His Majesty." What does it have to do with the Qin clan? The situation in the imperial court is very complicated. Do you really think this matter is as simple as an audit? Qin Yan looked at him and said in a deep voice, "Your investigation has directly pushed our Qin clan to the opposing side of all the courtiers. Also, the Qin clan, the Chui clan, the Zhen clan. You've caused a great disaster this time." Qin Yan's face was incomparably gloomy. This disaster not only implicated their clans, but also the king of Shu behind them. Li Yi's method of killing with a borrowed knife was too sinister. Qin Xiang, who was sitting at the head of the table, stood up and said slowly, "There's no need to go to the academy tomorrow. You're not allowed to interfere in this matter." Qin Feng's face was filled with dissatisfaction. Just as he was about to speak, a Qin family servant rushed in from outside and said, "Not good, the Qin family's Li Sen, young master Li Sen was poisoned to death when he was eating at Drunken Moon restaurant." When everyone in the hall heard this, their expressions changed. Qin Feng was stunned for a moment and looked over in disbelief. Qin clan's Qin Li Sen was eating with friends at Drunken Moon restaurant. After eating and drinking, he walked out of Drunken Moon restaurant. After a few steps, he collapsed, foaming at the mouth and his face turned green. Not long after, he lost consciousness. Fortunately, there was a clinic nearby. After he was carried in, they immediately diagnosed that he had been poisoned. They tried several methods to detoxify the poison, but to no avail. In the end, they pinched his mouth and forced 2 liters of feces into his mouth. After vomiting for a while, he finally woke up. Chen, who had finally woken up, fainted again when he saw the filthy scene in front of him. He was still unconscious until now. After the incident, everyone in Drunken Moon Tower, from the shopkeeper to the waiters and cooks, were captured. However, several hours had passed, and the government still did not get any useful information from their mouths. They only knew that a new chef had been recruited yesterday. After the incident, there was no more news about that chef, as if he had completely disappeared from the world. Just a few days ago, the son of the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned to death. This matter had not been completely settled yet, and now another son of the Qin clan had been poisoned. Just as everyone was wondering if the mastermind behind the scenes was making another move, another matter came out. The second son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, Li Jianren, had carelessly fallen down the stairs while visiting a brothel. One of his legs had been broken, and he was still lying unconscious in his home. The palace had just sent an imperial doctor over, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. If this matter did not attract the attention of the people, then when Chui Shixin of the Chui clan was almost run over by a speeding carriage on the street, no matter how slow the people's reactions were, they should have known that something important had happened. "How is it?" In the Qin clan, Qin Yan walked up and asked when he saw his third son return. The middle-aged man walked over and said, "The Qin clan has already gone over. Li Sen has already woken up, but he has been vomiting non-stop. The Qin clan was worried that something had happened to him, so they had someone knock him unconscious." "What about the Li clan?" Qin Yan asked again. The middle-aged man opened his mouth and said, "Li Jianren, the imperial doctor said that if he can wake up tomorrow, he will be fine." Qin Yan's eyebrows jumped. "Then what if he doesn't wake up?" "If he doesn't wake up?" The middle-aged man sighed and said, "Then he will never wake up again. The Li clan is in a mess right now. His Majesty has sent out the imperial guards. The brothel has already been surrounded by people, and no one is allowed to enter or leave. Chui Shixin is still fine. He was pushed by the servants beside him, and only suffered superficial wounds. The middle-aged man's face was gloomy as he said, "Those people, they are too bold. His Majesty has said that if they embezzle more than 30,000 taels of silver, their heads will be left behind." Qin Yan slowly opened his mouth and said, "If they don't do this, what awaits them is also death." Chen Lisan was poisoned, Li Jianren's life and death were unknown, and Cui Shixin was almost run over by a carriage on the street. Behind the two of them, Qin Feng stood there, his lips pale, his body trembling, and waves of dizziness assailed him. Qin Yan turned his head to look at him and asked, "Now, do you know what stupid things you have done?" Thump. Qin Feng's legs went soft, and he knelt down. Chen Lisan, Cui Shixin, Li Jianren, the three famous hedonistic young masters of the capital met with misfortune at the same time. After the authorities got involved in the investigation, they naturally dug out many details that people didn't know. For example, they were all students of the Mathematics Academy. Another example was that they all participated in helping the Imperial Censorate investigate the accounts. After knowing this information, the matter couldn't be any more obvious. Revenge, or perhaps it was intimidation, or threats. In a short period of a few days, many officials in the capital were sent to prison by them. Those who should be confiscated had their houses confiscated, and those who should be beheaded were beheaded. Some people had no future, and some people lost their lives. How could matters in the officialdom be so simple? The officials were divided into factions, and pulling one hair could affect the whole body. Perhaps, the person who was sent to prison was an important chess piece that one of the factions had painstakingly laid out. It was because of their interference that many years of hard work had gone down the drain. Of course, this was also a possibility, but no faction in the court would have the guts to offend the Cui and Qin families at the same time. To be able to do such a crazy thing, it was more likely that they were greedy people hidden among the court officials. Once they were found out, they would definitely die. Under such circumstances, it was not surprising that they would stake everything on one throw and do such an irrational thing. With such a terrible thing happening in the capital, the news naturally spread quickly to the palace. It was said that when the emperor found out about this, he was furious and immediately ordered the Secret Intelligence Bureau to investigate the case. At the same time, he urged the Imperial Censorate to speed up the investigation without any delay. After all, everyone knew that if the investigation continued like this, the mastermind behind the scenes would have nowhere to hide. At some point, thick, dark clouds had already enveloped the entire capital. At this time, a few more pieces of news came out, causing the whole matter to fall into a deadlock. After Chen Lisan was poisoned, Li Jianren was seriously injured, and Cui Shixin fell ill due to fear. Qin Feng of the Qin family accidentally caught a cold. He had a high fever and was bedridden. Zheng Zijian of the Zheng family scalded his feet with hot water and could not walk. The third young master of the Feng family was suffering from hysteria, and the fifth young master of the Han family had a seizure. In short, in one night, 11 students from the Mathematics Academy who were assisting the Imperial Censorate in investigating the accounts fell ill and were injured. The injuries were very sudden, and the illness was very clever. It was not life-threatening, but it was likely that they would have to recuperate at home for a long time. Chapter 607. Qin Feng lay on the bed, his face pale. Although the weather was much better than the cold winter, standing naked outside in the middle of the night was still extremely painful. Why? I don't believe that those people are so daring. His Majesty will definitely send more guards to protect us. I don't understand. He gritted his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "This country belongs to His Majesty. Disobeying the Emperor's orders is simply a dead end." Qin Feng's father, Qin Lang, stood beside the bed and looked at him. He said indifferently, "Feng, do you know where you are worse than Qin Yu?" As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Feng suddenly raised his head. Qin Lang looked at him and said, "You want to be valued by His Majesty. This is not wrong. If it was 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have stopped you. But now, how long can this country stay in His Majesty's hands? Could it be?" Qin Feng's expression changed. Before this, his father had never told him about these things. Qin Lang looked at his pale son and sighed. He said slowly, after this incident, you should obediently stay in the mathematics school. When the time is right, you will naturally have a bright future. Don't do these things anymore. Does it still hurt? Tseng Zijian's feet were wrapped in a thick white cloth. A luxuriously dressed woman walked in and asked with a worried face. Tseng Zijian gritted his teeth and said, No, it doesn't hurt anymore. How can it not hurt when it's boiling water? A middle-aged man walked in from outside the door. He coldly snorted and said, Making you unable to get off the ground for 2 months is already very light. Otherwise, you will end up like the two from the Chen and Li families. Thinking of Chen Lisan and Li Jianren, Tseng Zijian lowered his head and a trace of fear appeared on his face. Feng family. The current head of the Feng family warned his third son, remember, you are suffering from hysteria. Without my permission, your hysteria cannot be cured. Forget it, don't go to the mathematics school for the time being. In the Han clan, a young man said with a bitter expression, Father, why did you say that I'm suffering from horse fever? Even if it's hysteria, it's fine. Horse fever. How am I supposed to live in the future? The head of the Han clan snorted coldly and said, Your hysteria has been used by the Feng clan. You just have to bear with it. It's better to be cured immediately than to die. For the next few days, you should also stay at home due to your illness. Forget about going to the academy, lest you end up like those other families. Tomorrow, I'll send someone to the Divination Academy. Tell them that you're seriously ill and that you should stay at home for half a month. Similar conversations took place in the homes of many influential officials. Every family that had children studying at the Mathematics Academy gave their children a series of reminders. He was absolutely not allowed to participate in the imperial court's investigation of the accounts. What happened to the Chen family, the Li family, and the Chui family was a warning. The other families used self-harm to quickly extricate themselves from this matter. Other than the imperial family and the imperial censors, who valued their reputation more than their lives, no one else was willing to get involved in this matter. This chaos was only the beginning. They could only hope that His Majesty could end it as soon as possible. Otherwise, no one knew how chaotic the capital would become. Is there no one willing to continue investigating? In the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing held a memorial presented by the imperial censor. He narrowed his eyes and tapped the table with his index finger. Changde walked in from outside and said, Chen Lisan of the Chen family was indeed poisoned. The son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was pushed down from upstairs. As for the others, I'm afraid they deliberately did it to avoid trouble. I'm afraid the person behind this is an important official that I rely on. Emperor Jing sighed and said, Changde, you have followed me for so many years. Tell me, was I really wrong this time? A gloomy expression appeared on Changde's face. He said, Your Majesty is naturally not wrong. This old servant also wants to find and kill those vermin who do not do anything. It was a wise decision for Your Majesty to ask County Uncle Li to establish the School of Mathematics. Otherwise, I'm afraid that you will never know that these people exist. Emperor Jing covered his chest and pointed to the thick pile of memorials on the table. He said, Look, these are all memorials to stop investigating the accounts of the officials in the capital. In the court, everyone is in a panic. If I really continue investigating, the court will be in chaos. Changde raised his head but did not say anything. Now that things had reached this point, only His Majesty could make a decision. Emperor Jing rubbed the space between his eyebrows and said, What is Li Yi doing? Today is considered the school's holiday. He is resting at home. Changde replied. Changde thought for a moment and said, What about when the school is not on holiday? Emperor Jing asked again. Changde thought for a moment and said, He is also resting at home, bastard, besides being lazy all day, what else can he do? He actually let Han, an 11-year-old child, take care of such a big school of mathematics. Shanning and Yongning now spend more time with him than in the palace. Emperor Jing's face showed a trace of annoyance. He snorted coldly and said, he really seized the opportunity to use public office for personal gain. The Qin family, the Qin family, the Chui family, the Xing family, this time, he did not let any of them go. I'm afraid he had already expected such a result. County Uncle Li is never willing to suffer losses. Thinking of his speculation a few days ago, Chengde nodded slightly. If it were not for the families of those people who came to His Majesty to complain, these people would have all been eliminated on the day of the enrollment of the School of Mathematics. However, they tried their best and even made a certain promise to His Majesty to let these people enter the School of Mathematics. What was the result? It had not even been half a month since the School of Mathematics opened, but several people almost lost their lives because of this. The others did not hesitate to harm their bodies to avoid disaster. If they knew this would happen, why did they do it? Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "Let him enter the palace to see me." Fong said with a face full of amazement, "Those people are really ruthless. I heard that the young master of the Qin family was poured with a lot of feces to save his life. There is also that B*tch Li. When he went to the brothel, he almost fell to his death. The rest of the people were also injured and disabled. Yes, they are really ruthless." Li Yi nodded and agreed with his words. He had met Qin Feng and Xing Zijian's students many times. They usually looked gentle, but when they attacked, they were really ruthless. They did not even let go of himself. Such people were too dangerous and not worth being friends with. What was more dangerous was the corrupt officials of the Jing kingdom. They were so ruthless. The poor students of the School of Mathematics. If all of them were injured and had to lie at home for a few months, they would definitely fail the final exam. What would they do if they were kicked out of the School of Mathematics by Li Han? Wouldn't this make heroes bleed and cry? How sad, how sad. He really did not expect those corrupt officials to be so crazy. They learned from their mistakes. The students of the School of Mathematics could not be sent out. Otherwise, it would be pushing his students into the fire pit. If he had known that he would have to risk his life to check the accounts, he would have asked the Imperial Censorate for more money. This time, he had suffered a great loss. Thinking of the silver, Li Yi felt a little heartache. When he saw Chang's face, his heart ached even more. Chapter 608. Your Majesty, Chengde's face was stiff. Just as he opened his mouth, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Chengde's mouth was half open as he froze in place. When he came back to his senses, Li Yi had already walked out the door. "You know that His Majesty wants to summon you into the palace?" Li Yi was too lazy to reply to Chang's words. Wasn't it obvious? The old emperor had obviously gone overboard with the investigation of the accounts. He was probably doubting his life right now. Moreover, Chengde was the old emperor's personal eunuch and would not easily leave the palace. Under normal circumstances, when he saw Chang, he would most likely summon him into the palace. "Wait here for a while. I'll be right out." At the palace gate, Li Yi got off the carriage and turned his head to speak. Seeing Fang's hesitant expression, he looked at him and asked, "What's the matter? Say it." "Son-in-law, can you bring me in with you this time?" Fang had a troubled expression as he said, "I haven't seen what the palace looks like yet." Li Yi looked at Chengde and saw him nod. He had the others wait at the palace gate. He waved at Fang and walked into the palace gate. Fang followed closely behind. Granny Lu looked around as if she was looking at a grand garden. Her gaze lingered on the tall palaces for a long time. "His Majesty is inside. You can go in by yourself." Chengde stopped at the entrance of the imperial garden and stopped Fang, who wanted to follow him in. After walking through a bluestone passage that was more than 10 feet long, the familiar pavilion was in front of them. "Sit." In the pavilion, Emperor Jing was not wearing a dragon robe. He was only wearing bright yellow casual clothes. Li Yi looked at the porridge on the table, rubbed his stomach, and said, "Your Majesty, I just ate at home." Even if he had eaten, he still had to eat. It was a good habit to only eat until he was 80% full. He hadn't eaten in the palace for a long time and the imperial chef's skills had improved. In this matter, did I really do something wrong? Emperor Jing suddenly asked without rhyme or reason. What is it? Li Yi was drinking the soup with a spoon. He thought that it was necessary to go to the catering office and ask how the soup was made. It was sour and sweet, so Rui should like it. Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, "Don't play dumb in front of us." Li Yi put down the spoon, sighed, and said, "His Majesty is not wrong. It is this world that is wrong. Speak human language. It's not wrong for His Majesty to want to get rid of the parasites in the court. However, if there are too many parasites, the entire court will collapse if he wants to get rid of them all. The imperial court cannot collapse." Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "Can we really not investigate any further?" Li Yi drank another mouthful of soup and said, "If we don't investigate, wouldn't it be too easy for them?" "Are you going to investigate or not?" Emperor Jing looked at him and asked. Investigate. Emperor Jing was about to ask him how to investigate, but Li Yi's tone changed. Investigate. Whether to investigate or not, it's up to your Majesty to decide. Seeing that the old emperor's breathing was a little short, as if he was about to have an asthma attack, Li Yi hurriedly said, Your Majesty, what's wrong with you? Someone, call the imperial doctor. How can we keep the court in order and make them spit out the money they have embezzled? Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi and said, I will leave this matter to you. Li Yi almost spat out the soup and said, Your Majesty, this is too offensive. It will offend all the civil and military officials in the court. Emperor Jing looked at him and asked, So you want others to offend you? Someone has to disregard their own interests and do something for the country. If everyone only thinks about themselves, how can the country be strong and how can the people be rich? Li Yi sighed and said, Your Majesty also knows that I have offended enough people in the court. If I don't bring a few guards with strong martial arts skills, I won't dare to go out. The people's hearts are terrible. Those enemies of mine, whether it's in the open or in the dark, are almost endless. They even use men of sacrifice. They don't even dare to drink tea when they go to someone's residence. The guards at home are a little more powerful than others. If I offend more people, I'm afraid there will be no place for me in the big Jing kingdom. Really? Emperor Jing frowned and asked. Your Majesty, believe it or not, if I walk home from the palace alone, Your Majesty will never see me again. I can't offend them. Li Yi said with a sigh. Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, Among the officials in the court, who can't be offended more than you? They should be the ones who should be more worried, right? It was a little unconscionable to say this. He didn't offend anyone at home all day, and people came to climb the wall in the middle of the night. When did he take the initiative to harm others? How did the king of Shu treat him? How did the Chen and Shui families treat him? Assassinations by men of sacrifice, impeachment by the court. They were simply unscrupulous. In the face of ferocious enemies, how did he respond? He helped the king of Shu build momentum and help him win the hearts of the people to fight for the throne. He disregarded the past and allowed the children of his enemies to go to school. He taught them knowledge, gave them meritorious deeds, and gave them a bright future. Who else in the world could disregard the past and repay evil with good? Well, the money in the national treasury was not used for the people. They were all fed to these vermin. I can't swallow this, but I can't continue to investigate like this. It will mess up the court. You have a lot of ideas. Help me with some ideas, and I won't care about you being lazy at home all day. Jing Emperor picked up his chopsticks and began to eat without waiting for his response. It was obvious that he didn't give him a chance to refuse. The atmosphere was slightly awkward. Li Yi once again filled a bowl of soup for himself and looked up at Jing Emperor. The dignified king of a country only cared about money. Last time, he said that he stinked of money. Now it seemed that he was the stinkiest one. Your Majesty, before that, I want to clarify that I am not being lazy at home. Li Yi put down the bowl and said, I am actually, Jing Emperor took out a crispy melon from somewhere and took a bite. He said, "What? Haven't you thought of a reason?" For a moment, he really couldn't think of a good reason. Li Yi sighed and said, "Well, Your Majesty, let the intelligence office send all the accounts to the School of Arithmetic. Then send 1,000 imperial guards to surround the School of Arithmetic. 3 days later, will this method work?" Jing Emperor put down the milk melon and looked at him. Li Yi took the last milk melon on the table and took a bite. He said, "Whether it will work or not, we will know after we try it." Then he added, "By the way, send the accounts that have been checked over together." Jing Emperor looked at him and asked, "Why?" Li Yi explained, "The School of Arithmetic has developed a new and more scientific method of checking accounts. The accounts that have problems in the past must have problems. The accounts that have no problems in the past may not be really good. In that case, let them send it together." Jing Emperor nodded. He stood up and walked outside. "Well, I will arrange this matter early. You should also go back and make some preparations." Li Yi looked up at him. "Your Majesty, I don't know how to calculate the wages." Jing Emperor narrowed his eyes. "What wages?" "Your Majesty, you also know that the students are risking their lives to check the accounts." "We can't." Emperor Jing sat down again and said, "Well, today I will properly calculate with you the problem of the salary." He looked up. "This expression. How is this calculating wages?" "It is clearly calculating accounts." "Your Majesty, go first." Li Yi picked up the spoon again. "I will finish this bowl of soup." Chapter 609. Son-in-law, how much do you think it will take to build such a large palace? As the two of them walked out of the palace, Fong pointed to a palace not far away and asked. Li Yi glanced at the palace and said, "No amount of silver will do." "Why?" Fong was startled and quickly asked. "This kind of palace can only be built by the royal family. If others build it, they will be overstepping the rules and will be beheaded." There were many rules in the royal family. There were rules for what kind of person, what kind of carriage, and what kind of house could be built. If one overstepped the rules, others might suspect that one wanted to rebel or something. It was even more foolish than hiding the dragon robe at home. Fong thought for a moment and asked, "Then can we find a place to build it secretly?" "No." Changde, who was walking in front, flatly refused. Fong's budding dream was shattered just like that. The investigation of the accounts seemed to have really blown up. Although a few students from the School of Mathematics who were assisting the Imperial Censorate couldn't continue the investigation due to their injuries and illnesses, the Emperor's determination to eliminate corrupt officials didn't change at all. The secret intelligence unit moved out that night. From the 6 ministries to the local government, all the accounts were packed and sent to the School of Mathematics. Even the places that had been checked before were checked again. Seeing the accounts being carried away box by box, many officials' hearts raced. This night was destined to be a sleepless night for many officials in the court. At the same time, all the city gates in the capital were suddenly monitored strictly. Every city gate was guarded by no less than 100 imperial guards. They were conducting strict checks on people entering and leaving the city. The atmosphere in the morning court was especially gloomy. Other than a few insignificant reports, all the officials stood in their positions obediently and didn't say a word. As usual, the Emperor announced the end of court after asking a few questions. The officials who had left court were no longer talking and laughing as they usually did. They were all in a hurry. When they left the palace, they couldn't help but look in a certain direction. Even the figures of the 1,000 imperial guards at the entrance of the School of Mathematics could still be vaguely recognized. When he raised his head, the clear sky seemed to be covered in thick dark clouds that pressed down on him, making it hard for him to breathe. The Qin family. Fool. Qin Yen slammed the table and said angrily, "It's fine if you didn't think through the pros and cons of this matter and participated in it, but you actually covered up for a criminal. Do you know that the accounts you checked this morning have all been sent back to the School of Divination? If you're found out that you're covering up for your own friends, that's a crime of deceiving the Emperor." Looking at his furious uncle, Qin Feng's already pale face turned even paler. Then, he felt the world spin around him. His vision went black and he lost consciousness. Feng, a middle-aged woman's expression changed, and she quickly walked to the bed. In Kaifeng, there's Justice Bao. He's impartial and incorruptible. In the small garden of the Qin Manor, the fifth master of the Qin family drank a little wine. From time to time, he would pinch a bean into his mouth and shake his head. Fifth master, what kind of place is Kaifeng? A big man standing behind him asked in confusion. It's written in the opera. Who knows where this place is? The fifth master of the Qin family didn't even raise his head as he said, in the future, don't doze off in the brothel and ruin fifth master's mood. The big man nodded repeatedly. The fifth master was extremely fond of opera. It was said that his most beloved concubine was an entertainer. Later on, she died for some reason. However, this hobby of the fifth master had never changed. The fifth master of the Qin family suddenly sighed and said, Feng, this child's brain is still too simple. If he becomes an official in the future, I'm afraid he'll be eaten by others until not even his bones remain. After a pause, he continued, however, I'm afraid he won't have the chance to become an official in the future. The Xing family. Idiot, look at what stupid things you've done. The head of the Xing family, the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Xing Shichen, slapped his son's face. His expression was exceptionally sinister. Cover up? Who do you think you are? You still want credit? There's no credit left. Do you know what this is? This is deceiving the emperor. Even losing your head is not enough. Hearing this, beads of sweat rolled down Xing Zijian's forehead. His whole body trembled like a sieve. The Cui family. The Qin family. The Feng family. The Han family. Li Yi. After several officials scolded their sons, they gritted their teeth and spat out these two words. After gnashing his teeth for a while, the anger on his face turned into deep regret. The Academy of Mathematics should not have begged His Majesty to let them in. Half of the children of the aristocratic families are on sick leave. Li Yi put down his book and looked up. A professor from the Mathematics Academy quickly said, Yes, Sir Dean. Today, there are less than 30 people who returned to the Academy. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Then give the rest of them a few days off. It just so happens that the Academy is busy these few days. They won't be able to help much. As soon as he finished speaking, a general of the Imperial Army walked in from outside. He cupped his hands and said, Sir Li, all the accounts have been delivered. Thank you for your hard work. Li Yi stood up and said with a smile. The leader of the Imperial Guards was flattered and quickly said, We are following the Emperor's orders. This is our duty. Sir Li, you are too kind. At this time, the 66 students from poor families had gathered at the entrance of the Mathematics Academy's classroom. This is your first chance to serve the Imperial Court. What you need to do is to carefully check these accounts. Every time you find a problematic account, you will be able to accumulate 1 credit. This credit will be used for the final evaluation at the end of the semester. Li Han put his hands behind his back and paced in front of the students. He said something loudly and occasionally stopped to look at his palm before continuing to speak. The students from poor families were excited. This was the first time they had a chance to apply what they had learned. Not to mention, they could also obtain credits. They would not have to worry about the final examination and would be able to contribute to the Imperial Court. They had long been eager to give it a try. At this moment, no one held any grudges against the 11 children of the aristocratic families who monopolized this opportunity. Poisoning, pouring feces, breaking a leg, being hit by a carriage. It turned out that going out for an internship was so dangerous. If that was the case, wasn't this the dean's way of protecting the students from poor families? The dean had really put in a lot of effort. Now that they could sit in the Mathematics Academy and be protected by so many Imperial Guards, it was all because of the dean. Even if those corrupt officials wanted to take revenge, they would not be able to do so. Thinking of this, everyone looked at the figure walking over from the side, and their faces were filled with deep gratitude. Time is of the essence. Everyone, keep your spirits up. We must finish checking all the accounts within 3 days. Li Yi walked in front of everyone and looked at them. Are you confident? Yes. Everyone answered in unison. Not long after, the entire Mathematics Academy was filled with the sound of beads colliding with each other. Every official who passed by the School of Mathematics couldn't help but feel depressed. It seemed peaceful outside, but everyone knew that a storm was brewing inside that could engulf the entire imperial court. Once the gates of the Mathematics Academy were opened, a terrifying storm would be released. Chapter 610. Bang! Li Yi knocked away Li Xian's East Wind and chose a card. 30,000. 2 days ago, the students of the arithmetic faculty had begun to calculate the accounts nervously. The officials of the imperial court were all on edge because of this matter. They couldn't sleep well or eat well. They had lost 5 kilograms in 2 days. As the dean of the arithmetic faculty, if he were to play mahjong in the faculty, it would be a little too much. Fortunately, the school was not far from the palace. Li Xian had been busy in the Academy of Sciences next door. Since the Princess Royal was playing mahjong, they needed one more player. Finally, they called the arrogant Lolita over. Win. The arrogant Lolita pushed down her card wall and smiled. Give me money, give me money. Yongning stood by Li Yi's side. Her heart ached as she passed a copper coin to Li Yi. In just an hour, the copper coin in her hand had been reduced by half. While shuffling the cards, Mingzhu looked up at Li Yi and said slowly, Today, more than 10 officials said they were sick and didn't attend the morning court. The morning court ended in less than a quarter of an hour. She paused and said, If it drags on for a few more days, I'm afraid half of the people in the court will be gone. We'll know the result tomorrow. Li Yi looked at the cards. They were very good. He casually played a south wind. Now he just needed to wait for 6 or 9 rounds of winning. Win. The arrogant Lolita pushed down the card wall and said with a smile, Give me money. Mahjong couldn't be played anymore, so they played poker. Li Yi and the arrogant Lolita were on one side, while Li Xian and the princess were on the other. After a while, Yongning's smile became bright. Father, are you really going to find all the corrupt officials? Play cards well. Look at how professional Li Xian was. The Princess Royal Highness couldn't stop talking about the state affairs. Li Yi waved his hand and said, How is that possible? If we catch all of them, I'm afraid the entire court will be purged. Mingzhu's expression softened as she asked, Then why do you still want to check these accounts? You'll know during the morning assembly tomorrow. Li Yi arranged his cards and changed the topic. How's your matter going? Everything is going well. Mingzhu nodded her head and said, According to what you said, a large piece of land has been set up outside the city and a workshop has been built. Most of the farmers near the capital have sent over girls above the age of 13. The textile machines have also been improved. Soon, the clothing shops in the capital will be able to open on a large scale. When the time comes, we'll have to break it down. Clothes for the commoners and those for the nobles and officials have to be separated. For the latter, it'll take 2 more days of work and the craftsmanship will be more exquisite. The price will be 100 times more expensive. Also, send someone to manage the military rations business with the family of generals. You're a princess, so it'll be easier for you to interact with them. No one will gossip about you. I'll just be in charge of collecting money. Li Xian was a little depressed as he asked, Why can Mingzhu do the military rations business, but I can't? Li Yi glanced at him. Was this guy stupid? Although he was considered half a member of the royal family, he was still the son of a prince. What would the courtiers think if he made such a good relationship with the family of generals and went there every other day? A smile suddenly appeared on Li Xian's face. He didn't mind this matter anymore. He threw out a few cards and said, 3 and 2. I only have 1 card left. I can't afford it. Li Yi waved his hand. 3 2s and 2 3s. He couldn't afford it. And Mingzhu was on his side. Even if he could afford it, he wouldn't want it. Royal bomb. The Tsundere Lolita threw out all the cards in her hand. Straight, we won again, give me money, give me money. When it came to playing cards and chess, there was no more reliable teammate than the Tsundere Lolita. Yong Ning was busy collecting the money. Li Xian was a little discouraged. He thought of something and asked, Mingzhu, your birthday is coming soon. What present do you want this year? This kind of question was wrong. Who would directly ask others what present they wanted? When the time came, they could directly give others a few million taels of silver. It would definitely be more shocking than any present. The Tsundere Lolita raised her head to look at Li Yi and asked, Sir, what present do you intend to give my royal sister? My birthday is coming soon. Your present can't be worse than my royal sister's. It's a secret for now. Li Yi actually didn't know when Mingzhu's birthday was. However, it was just in time this time. He should be able to prepare it soon. My birthday is the same as Mingzhu's. Li Xian turned to look at Li Yi with a meaningful gaze. Li Yi cupped his hands at him. Happy birthday. The second day, it's already the second day. In an official's mansion in the capital, a middle-aged man was anxiously pacing in the courtyard. There were a few blisters on his mouth. Master, are you still not going to the court tomorrow? A woman walked out of the house and said worriedly. The middle-aged man waved his hand impatiently and said, No, I'm not going. Just say that I'm sick, very sick. As soon as he finished speaking, a servant came forward and reported, Master, people from the palace have come. The middle-aged man's face immediately turned pale. His legs went soft and he asked with a trembling voice, Come. How many came? 1. The servant said, Master, do you want to see him? No, no. Go ask him what's the matter. The middle-aged man waved his hand and quickly walked to the bed in the room to lie down. He used 2 pieces of old ginger to wipe his face. He immediately looked much weaker. Not long after, the servant came in from outside. Left? The middle-aged man asked. The servant replied, He left. The middle-aged man got up from the bed and asked, What did he say? The eunuch from the palace said that His Majesty has something important to announce in the morning court tomorrow and cannot ask for leave. Even if his life is hanging by a thread, he must be carried to the Golden Hall. The middle-aged man's vision turned black and he weakly fell onto the bed. At different times, there were many officials who also felt that their vision was turning black. In the past few days, almost half of the officials in the court had been gone. It seemed that they had all contracted some kind of acute illness overnight. They were so sick that they could not even go to court and could only rest at home. His Majesty did not say much about this. It seemed that nothing had happened in the past 2 days. There was nothing unusual in the court. However, on the second day, he sent a eunuch to inform those officials who were sick that they were not allowed to ask for leave in the morning court. The message was very clear. Even if they were to die, they had to die in the court. Everyone knew that all the accounts sent to the mathematics school would be settled the next day. Next, it was time for His Majesty to settle the accounts with them. The various city gates of the capital had been tightly guarded by the imperial guards. It was easy to enter the capital but difficult to leave. Furthermore, the vicinity of the homes of the officials in the court had probably already been closely watched by the secret intelligence unit. If they made any abnormal movements, the secret intelligence unit would immediately come to their manors to ask for a cup of tea. Li Yi was not worried that there would be people in the capital who would not be able to sleep that night. He was also not worried that their bodies would not be able to take it after not sleeping well for many days. He looked at the oval glass bead that Fong handed over. There were almost no bubbles inside. Although there was still a bit of color, it did not affect it much. In the past month, after many improvements in equipment and craftsmanship, he had finally pushed it to this step. He could finally use it to swindle money, he could finally use it to benefit the vast number of women in the capital. If we improve the craftsmanship, it will be even easier to swindle money. Li Yi handed the glass bead to Fong and reminded him again. At the same time, a carriage loaded with boxes drove out of the mathematics school and straight into the palace gates. Chapter 6:11. Going to morning court was a very troublesome matter. Usually, one could lie in bed until 8 o'clock. If one wanted to go to court, one had to wake up at 6 o'clock. Li Yi had never been interested in going to court. Unfortunately, the old emperor had announced yesterday that he could not be absent from today's morning court. Whoever asked for leave would be recorded in a small booklet. It was said that a minister who was seriously ill was brought into the palace by eunuchs. At this moment, he was sitting on the chair in front. Waking up late would ruin the morning, and waking up early would ruin the day. The consequence of waking up early was that he had to lean against General Shui's pillar for a while. He missed the bed in the dew hall. There was still some time before the morning court began. If he had known earlier, he would have gone to the eldest princess's place to lie down. Boy, don't stand out during the morning court. This matter is not something you can interfere with. General Shui patted his shoulder and warned him. Li Yi yawned and opened his eyes. Don't worry, old Shui. I won't say a word today. I'll just lean against here and wait for the court to end. I'm serious this time. General Shui frowned and said, this time, His Majesty asked the divination school to investigate the accounts. Although you are not to be blamed, don't expect the court officials to remember your good deeds. This matter has become too big. Don't get yourself into any more trouble. I know. Li Yi said seriously and continued to lean against the pillar to nap. Today's morning court session was a one-man show for the old emperor. No one could interrupt him. In the Golden Hall, other than a certain person leaning against the pillar and a few ministers who were given a seat because of their health, all the court officials stood quietly in their seats. Some had sallow faces and some had sunken eyes. It was obvious that they had not lived well these past few days. There were even some who seemed to have been sucked out of their spirits. They were extremely dispirited and looked up from time to time with eyes full of fear. Emperor Jing arrived an hour later than the appointed morning court time. It was not until Li Yi had caught up on his sleep that he saw him slowly walking out from the back of the hall accompanied by Changde. Greetings, Your Majesty. Emperor Jing sat on the dragon throne and the court officials bowed. Hundreds of people spoke in unison. No need for formalities. Emperor Jing raised his hand. There was no special expression on his face as he said, "Does anyone have anything to report today?" It was silent below. Everyone knew that the accounts had been checked and the emperor would definitely fly into a rage at the morning court. Many officials in the court would not be able to safely hang their heads on their necks. However, at this moment, the emperor's calm attitude was really puzzling. Before figuring out the situation, who would dare to speak at this time? At this moment, an imperial censor stood up, bowed, and said, "Your Majesty, I accuse Chen Lisan, Qin Feng, and Cui Shixin of the Divination Academy of abusing their authority for personal gain. They relied on Your Majesty's trust to deliberately cover up the guilty officials during the accounts investigation a few days ago, disrupting the public's view, and attempting to deceive Your Majesty." As soon as these words came out, several people in the court immediately became gloomy. However, many people were slightly stunned. They knew that Chen Lisan, Qin Feng, Cui Shixin, and the others had helped the imperial censor to investigate the accounts. They were the ones who had uncovered the corrupt officials that His Majesty had dealt with previously. However, they only knew about this matter and did not know that these people had actually done something to cover up. These playboys were really bold and presumptuous. Did they really think that they could do whatever they wanted just because they had families behind them? It should be known that if this matter was investigated further, it would be a crime punishable by death. The crime of deceiving Your Majesty was a crime that could not be punished. The imperial censor named Chen Lisan and the others and then singled out the officials who had been covered up one by one. Many people in the court began to have strange expressions on their faces. This was really covering up. They had actually let off all the officials who were in the King of Shu's faction, but not a single one of the other factions had been left out. These playboys were even more daring than the elders in their families. At this moment, an official stood up and said, "Your Majesty, Cui Shixin and the others are only students of the college and not officials of the imperial court. They were working for the imperial court and were plotted against by villains. Regardless of what happened, they did not deserve to die. Although this official was also in the King of Shu's faction, he did not belong to the families behind these 11 people. He also had no connection with the officials who had been covered up. At this moment, only he could stand up and speak for these 11 people. Please show mercy, Your Majesty. Please show mercy, Your Majesty. After the imperial censor finished speaking, several more people stood up to plead for mercy for these people. There was only one reason, and that was to prevent this matter from being classified as deceiving the emperor. Otherwise, not a single one of these people would be able to escape. In fact, there were even 2 families with small numbers of people who would not be able to continue. Although the 11 of them have done meritorious deeds, their merits do not make up for their mistakes. They have sacrificed their work for personal reasons and covered up for their friends. Since they are not officials of the imperial court, from today onwards, these 11 people will be expelled from the College of Divination. The imperial court will never hire them again. Emperor Jing finally spoke, which made many people feel relieved. Never hiring them meant that they could only be playboys waiting to die in the future. They would never be able to enter the imperial court as officials. Although this result was still cruel, at least they could keep their lives. For big families like the Cui family, the Qin family, and the Qin family, the future of a collateral descendant was not a big deal. Of course, it was different for Lord Zheng of the Ministry of Revenue. If he could not give birth to an outstanding son with his wife, the Zheng family, which had struggled so hard to climb up, would end with his generation. Cui Yuncan, the county magistrate of Wang County, Qin Qin, Tian of the Department of Granaries. Emperor Jing named the names of the officials who were covered up by them one by one and said in a low voice, "Order the intelligence department to arrest these people and bring them back to the Ministry of Justice within 1 day." Not only did they not cover up the officials, but they also got themselves involved. The King of Shu's faction was really unlucky these days. If the King of Shu could return to the capital one day, who knew how many officials loyal to him would be left? Does anyone have anything else to report to the emperor? After a series of orders, Emperor Jing sat back on the dragon throne and asked everyone. Naturally, no one said anything. At the same time, many people had a glimmer of hope in their hearts. If no one else reported to the emperor, then, would today's morning court session end here? If so, didn't it mean that the emperor would let bygones be bygones? Thinking about it, this case involved a wide range of people and almost covered the entire imperial court. How could the emperor arrest everyone? If so, how many officials would be able to stand here tomorrow? Many people secretly breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. They should have thought of it earlier, The law did not punish the masses. Although the current situation of the Jing kingdom could not be considered as having internal and external troubles, it was not very good either. Moreover, the emperor's body could not hold on for too long. According to the emperor's character, the most important thing was to ensure the stability of the imperial court. How could he do such a radical thing at this time? This time, he probably just wanted to arrest a few examples to deter them. Unfortunately, this lucky thing happened to the officials of the King of Shu's faction. These days, they really should not have been so worried, since everyone has nothing to say. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, "Then, let me say a few words." His face suddenly darkened and he said coldly, "Come, arrest the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Chen Bo, the Left Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Feng Yuan, the Director of the Du Branch, Han Ning, for me." Emperor Jing called out a total of nearly 10 people's names. In the crowd, these people, who had just relaxed, suddenly tensed up. They looked up and their faces instantly turned pale. Chapter 6:12. How dare you? The officials he had just called out had already been taken away by the imperial guards who had rushed in from outside. Emperor Jing looked down with a gloomy expression. In a few years, hundreds of thousands of taels of silver. I am not raising officials, but a group of vermin. This official is guilty, please have mercy, your majesty. Please have mercy, your majesty. Please have mercy, your majesty. At this moment, no one had any illusions. Nearly 10 people knelt on the ground and cried out loud, tears and mucus flowing down their faces. A trace of fatigue appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He waved his hand and said, "Remove these people from their official positions. First, take them to the Supreme Court and confiscate their property. Put everything into the national treasury." Soon, those people were taken away by the imperial guards. The court officials below were all silent. They looked at the ground and did not dare to raise their heads. The highest official that had been called out by His Majesty was a fourth-rank official. A little higher would be the Minister of the Six Ministries. In recent years, it was the first time that such a large number of officials had been dismissed. And looking at His Majesty's expression, this was just the beginning. Could it be that His Majesty had really made up his mind to overthrow the entire court? Yesterday, the Divination Academy sent the results of the accounts to the palace. Emperor Jing turned around and walked up. He sat back on the dragon throne and said, "I looked through the accounts all night. I am very distressed." Hearing His Majesty's voice sink, the hearts of many court officials also sank. According to the previous situation, any problematic accounts could not be hidden from the students of the Divination Academy. Didn't that mean that all the evidence of the corruption of the capital's officials was in His Majesty's hands? Thinking of this, even those officials who had a clear conscience felt a chill on their backs. As for those who felt guilty, their feet were already a little unstable. This time, could it be that they really could not escape? Boy, His Majesty trusts you the most. This time, does His Majesty really plan to catch all those people in one fell swoop? Old General Shui pushed Li Yi and asked with a frown. Just now, the old emperor had spoken so loudly that he couldn't fall asleep. Li Yi was already awake. Hearing the words, he opened his eyes and said, "You generals should know what His Majesty will do, right?" Old General Ma waved his hand and said, "His Majesty's actions these days are very different from before. Even the few of us can't figure it out. Brat, don't keep us guessing. Hurry up and tell us." Li Yi shook his head and said, "How could His Majesty allow the court to fall into chaos?" "Generals, don't worry." Old General Shui stared at him and asked, "Do you really know the inside story?" "Shoo." Li Yi raised a finger and whispered, "This time, it's up to the generals to grasp the opportunity." A moment later, old General Shui's face lit up as he asked, "Is this true?" Li Yi retorted, "When have I ever deceived the generals?" "Good lad." Old General Shui patted him on the shoulder and rubbed his palms together. His eyes shone brightly. A faint fragrance drifted over to his side. The princess was standing beside him and asked, "Did something good happen?" During morning court sessions, the princess was the only woman who could enter this hall. Li Yi thought for a moment and felt that he should bring the princess along. Just as he was about to speak, another figure came over. The left assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Feng Yuan, was born into a poor family and failed in the imperial examinations. It was I who made an exception and recruited him. In the past 15 years, he has been promoted single-handedly. The Ministry of Revenue is in charge of money and rations. Do you know how much he has embezzled? 150,000 taels, a whole 150,000 taels. Do you know that for the sake of 50,000 taels of military expenditure, the Minister of War and the Minister of Revenue almost got into a fight in front of me? That's not even enough for Feng Yuan to embezzle for a year. You may not know the director of the inspection branch, Chening, but we remember it very clearly. In the 8th year of Yuanhe, he became a Jinsher. In the 10th year of Yuanhe, we promoted him to be the director of the inspection branch. 80,000 taels in 3 years. Jing Emperor's voice gradually turned from grief and indignation to pain. Some of the officials below were pale and trembling, while others showed shame on their faces. All of you here are not without problems. You are not much better than the people we have just captured. Touch your conscience. Do you still have a conscience? After a moment, Jing Emperor seemed to be tired from speaking. He sat back on the throne in a somewhat dispirited manner and said, "We have finished speaking. It's your turn to speak." Most of the officials still had their heads bowed and the entire hall was silent. At this time, whoever spoke first would be the first to face the emperor's anger. This official has something to say. Amidst the silence, an unhurried voice came from behind a pillar. Looking at the young man who walked out from behind the pillar, everyone's faces showed surprise and confusion. County Uncle Lee, it was actually County Uncle Lee. The investigation of the accounts was done by a student of the School of Mathematics. As the dean of the School of Mathematics and the person with the most royal favor in the court, he could have stayed out of it, but he stood up at this time. What did he want? Didn't he know that His Majesty was angry and whoever stood up would be unlucky? In the crowd, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, Li Mingzi, raised his head and showed a worried expression. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, frowned slightly. The capital governor, Dong Wenyun, looked at him in surprise. There were also a few people in the corner who looked at him with gloating eyes. "Speak." Jing Emperor glanced down and said lightly, "Reporting to your Majesty." Li Yi raised his head and said, "The School of Mathematics has been open for half a month. In order to create a good learning environment for the students, I want to dig an inner lake in the School of Mathematics. However, the school's budget is insufficient, so I want to apply for a grant from your Majesty." Before he finished speaking, many people in the hall were stunned. Was he talking about digging a lake? His Majesty was talking about corruption. What did it have to do with digging a lake? What did digging a lake have to do with the study of the School of Mathematics? Did County Uncle Lee really think that he could be so presumptuous in the court just because he was valued by His Majesty? Without waiting for them to react, another figure walked out. Old General Shui said in a rough voice, "If I may be so bold, I would like to ask your Majesty to allocate 100,000 taels of silver to purchase a new batch of military equipment for the frontline soldiers." Li Yi glanced at General Shui. He asked for 100,000 taels. Old Ginger was spicier and his heart was more ruthless. Before people could figure out why General Shui wanted to join in the fun, there was another voice in the hall. The eldest princess came forward and said, "I have been ordered to build a women's college. I am short of 50,000 taels." Li Xian, the son of Prince Ning and the dean of the Academy of Sciences, stepped forward and said, "The Academy of Sciences is about to open. I would like to apply for 50,000 taels of research funds from your Majesty." Crazy, they were all crazy. This was the most intuitive feeling of the courtiers. It was because the national treasury was tight that there was this investigation of accounts and His Majesty's thunderous anger. Wasn't it courting death to say this kind of thing at this time? It was understandable that County Uncle Lee was hysterical and General Shui was old and confused. But why did the eldest princess and the eldest prince come up to join in the fun? The expressions of many people in the imperial court immediately changed, and many people revealed expressions of schadenfreude. The next moment, Emperor Jing stood up and slowly said in front of everyone's eyes, "The new mathematics is very important to our Jing kingdom. The soldiers are fighting at the front line, and the ordnance is indispensable. The establishment of a women's college is also a matter for women. The research of the Academy of Sciences is beneficial to the country. But the national treasury is tight, and the money needs to be used in the most important places." Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, "The national treasury can't be used arbitrarily. How about this? I will take out 10,000 taels from the inner mansion. As for how to distribute it, you can discuss it yourself." General Shui quickly said, "Your Majesty, you must not. The inner mansion is responsible for the expenses of the palace. You must not mix it with these." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter. In the future, the standards of the banquets in the palace will be reduced, and I will save some money from other places." All the courtiers in the hall were stunned. His Majesty did not blame him at all and smoothly took over the topic. Compared to these things, the matter of accounts that almost caused the court to collapse seemed to be more important, right? Among the many courtiers, a middle-aged official suddenly came to his senses. The next moment, his breathing became a little rapid, and his face became flushed. He took a deep breath and took a big step forward. He said righteously, Your Majesty, the inner mansion is responsible for the expenses of the palace. It has already been carefully planned, and the expenditure must not be reduced. As a courtier, I should share Your Majesty's worries. I am willing to donate 20,000 taels for the soldiers of our Jing kingdom. Many officials in the court were stunned for a moment. After looking at each other, they finally seemed to realize something. Immediately, many people's faces became excited. Chapter 613. At this time, if there were still people who did not understand the purpose of County Uncle Lee's appearance, they were not qualified to stand in today's court. Of course, it was impossible for His Majesty to arrest all the corrupt officials in the court or drag them out to be beheaded. Not only would the court collapse, but the entire official system of the Jing kingdom would also collapse. However, corruption was real. His Majesty could not pretend that he did not see it. If he downplayed it, this phenomenon would become more serious in the future. His Majesty needed a way out, and some officials in the court also needed a way out, or a chance to atone for their crimes. Now, this opportunity had appeared. After an official from the Ministry of Revenue walked out, another official stood up and said with a serious face, Your Majesty, the students of the Mathematics College are the future pillars of the court. I am willing to donate 5,000 taels to the Mathematics College. As soon as he finished speaking, another official followed, I am willing to donate 8,000 taels to the Women's College. I am willing to donate 10,000 taels to the Academy of Sciences. Your Majesty has worked hard for the country and did not hesitate to reduce the expenditure of the inner residence. I am deeply ashamed and am willing to donate half of my family property. All the officials in the court had never been so patriotic and so loyal to the emperor. For the sake of sharing the emperor's worries, they would easily donate thousands of taels. In the future, it would definitely be a heavy stroke in the history books. During the reign of Jing He, the emperor was benevolent and reduced the taxes of many affected states, causing the national treasury to be empty. In the second month of the third year of Jing He, the officials were generous and donated nearly 1,000,000 taels of silver in one day. Some even donated half of their family property. They were the role models among the officials and were used by many emperors in the later generations to spur the officials. In the Golden Hall, Emperor Jing sat steadily on the dragon throne. The expression on his face was much more relaxed than before. No one knew when a table had been moved to the front. Deputy Minister Ma of the Imperial Censor sat there and took notes. The officials lined up one by one and fought to be the first to donate their family property. For them, this was not giving away their wealth, but fighting for their lives. All the officials present had already left a criminal record with His Majesty. His Majesty did not seem to want to pursue the matter, but under such circumstances, if anyone pretended to be stupid, their ending would not be much better than those who had been dragged out. Some officials didn't even know how much they had embezzled. At this moment, they had to make a rough estimate. They could only give more, not less. If they didn't have enough money, they had to sell everything they had and scrape together the money. If His Majesty found that the amount was not right after the comparison, he might use their official positions or their heads to make up the number. If they really couldn't come up with the money, they could only donate more than half of their family's wealth and use their sincerity to influence Her Majesty. Ma Zhongqing sat upright in front of the table, his hand writing in a very upright manner. He raised his head to look at the official who was walking over and smiled, Lord Su, tens of thousands of taels. 20,000, Lord Zhou. 10,000, Wei, 5,000. Kid, tell me honestly. Did you come up with this idea? Old General Shui stood behind the pillar and asked Li Yi. Old Shui, you're wrong. This kind of thing isn't something a kid can participate in. Li Yi waved his hand and shook his head. Old General Shui's face was full of disbelief. If this kid didn't mess up with Her Majesty, if this kid didn't collude with Her Majesty, why would he remind them to seize the opportunity? Li Xian was about to walk over when he was pulled back by Li Yi. Li Yi looked at him and asked, What are you going to do? Donate money. Li Xian's face was full of doubt as he asked, So many people have already donated. Aren't you going to donate some? Old General Shui shook his head. Mingzu looked at him but didn't say anything. Li Yi sighed and waved his hand, saying, "Go, go." Seeing his expression, Li Xian immediately stood still and said, "That's not right. Is there something I didn't think of?" Li Yi pointed at the dozens of officials who were chatting at the side and asked, "Why aren't they donating?" He was really starting to suspect if this guy's brain was really lacking in sensitivity to politics. In this aspect, even Her Royal Highness, as a woman, was better than him. After a moment, Li Xian finally came to a realization. Brilliant, really brilliant. Which immoral guy came up with this idea? If those corrupt officials knew about it, wouldn't they hate him to death? "Thank you, County Uncle Li." When an unfamiliar official walked over, he stopped by Li Yi's side for a moment, cupped his hands, and said in a low voice. Under Li Xian's astonished gaze, another person walked over and said in a low voice, "I will remember Lord Li's kindness. Let me give you a suggestion." After dealing with a few people, Li Yi turned back to look at Li Xian and said, "When you go back, eat more walnuts. Remember not to use the door clip." Her Royal Highness walked over and frowned. "I didn't expect there to be so many vermin in the imperial court. If the 5th and 6th rank officials are already like this, won't they be even more daring if they go higher up?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Petty officials are greedy. The higher you go, the less common this phenomenon is. The higher one's official rank was, the more importance they would place on their reputation. Their every move would be watched by countless people. Moreover, to them, a few thousand or 10,000 taels of silver was disdainful. At that level, which official didn't have a huge family or influence behind them? Only an idiot would delay their career for the sake of money. The purge in the imperial court this time was mostly aimed at middle-level officials. Those above the 3rd rank were not involved. On one hand, these officials couldn't be easily touched. On the other hand, Li Yi had checked the accounts. Except for a few, the rest were relatively minor and harmless. After all, the annual tax revenue of the Jing Kingdom didn't exceed 10 million taels of silver. The old emperor wasn't blind. It was impossible for him not to notice that too much money disappeared at once. Of course, this was the capital, where the emperor lived. The situation outside the capital was definitely more serious than here. The old emperor was really obsessed with money. The morning court session lasted for a long time. The morning court session still exceeded everyone's expectations. There was thunder, but it didn't last long. More of it was a light breeze and drizzle. The difference was that if someone didn't know what was good for them, the drizzle might be followed by thunder. They knew how much they had taken. This time, His Majesty was merciful and only punished a few typical people. As for the others, if they took the initiative to donate money, they wouldn't be held accountable. But it was only this time. Even if they avoided this time, they might not be able to avoid the next time. From now on, some people in the imperial court would have to be careful. If they went out of line again, they would have to settle old and new accounts at the same time. Of course, in the eyes of those officials who weren't affected, His Majesty's move was extremely brilliant. After today, the situation in the imperial court would change greatly. All the forces would be reshuffled, especially the King of Shu, who would suffer heavy losses. Among them, the Qin family, the Chen family, the Cui family and a few other big families would suffer heavy losses, but it wouldn't shake their foundation. However, for those officials who didn't have a solid foundation, His Majesty had a handle on them. They could only pray for themselves in the future. It could be foreseen that His Majesty's control over the entire imperial court would reach its peak in the future. It would even reach a peak that none of the previous emperors of the Jing Kingdom had reached. "Your Majesty," about the matter of the cultivation lake in the academy. In the rear hall, Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing and asked tentatively. 30,000 taels. Emperor Jing seemed to be in a good mood. He waved his hand and said, "I will only give you 30,000 taels. You can figure out the rest yourself." After a moment of shock, Li Yi immediately cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I will leave first." Looking at his decisive action, Emperor Jing's expression froze and he asked, How much money did you originally want from me? Li Yi had already stepped out of the hall. He turned his head and said, Your Majesty, I had originally planned to ask for 50,000 taels of silver, but the national treasury is tight. I will think of a way to get the remaining 20,000 taels of silver. Should I have said 10,000 taels just now? After Li Yi's figure disappeared, Emperor Jing touched his chin and said regretfully. Changde thought for a moment and said, Judging from County Uncle Li's decisiveness just now, I'm afraid 5,000 taels is also possible. Chapter 6:14. Husband, I don't think there are any holidays these days, right? Looking at the gifts that almost filled the entire room, Rui asked in surprise after thinking for a bit. This was not the most surprising part. Usually, her family did not have much contact with the officials and nobles in the capital. Even if there were holidays, it was impossible for her to receive so many gifts. The people who gave the gifts were all officials in the capital. Some of them were servants from their families, while others came personally. Their attitudes were very polite. Even when the housekeeper invited them into the manor for a cup of tea, they were rejected. They put down the gifts and left. It was extremely strange. Li Yi casually waved his hand and said, My wife, you don't have to worry about these things. In any case, if someone gives you gifts these days, just accept them. Don't worry. This time, he accepted the gifts with peace of mind. He did not feel any psychological pressure at all. The officials in the capital were still polite and gave expensive gifts. Based on the situation, they should have kept some of the money they had donated in court that day. If they knew that the old emperor had only planned to deal with a few greedy people and had decided to burn the accounts for the stability of the court and let the others go, would he take back these gifts? However, these gifts should still be accepted. After all, he had spent a lot of effort to persuade the old emperor to change his mind. Furthermore, he did not gain much from it, so why bother? After dealing with a few corrupt officials, the storm in court finally calmed down. After that, Li Yi did not go to court again. However, he heard that there had been a lot of personnel changes in court these days. Officials were promoted and demoted. Departments like the Ministry of Revenue had been purged from head to toe. Everyone chose to remain silent about the old emperor's big moves. The storm from the last corruption case had just passed and had not completely subsided. At this time, no one dared to speak too much and remind the emperor of some bad things and bring up old matters. Most of the officials in court would not let them go. As expected, the person who made money the easiest in the world was the emperor. With just a few words, he had immediately earned nearly 1,000,000 liang of silver. He had also established his prestige in court, intimidated a large number of people, recruited a large number of people, and taken the opportunity to purge a large number of people. He had killed several birds with one stone. This was a very good deal. Earning money was easy, but getting money from him was harder than ascending to the heavens. However, 30,000 taels of silver was more than enough to repair a lake. In this day and age, labor was not worth much, not to mention that the silver had to be kept for more important things. In the future, it could be used as research funds and the like. How could it be spent on such a small matter as repairing a lake? The timetable of the academy had changed these days. From morning to night, the sequence was digging the lake, going to class, digging the lake, and resting. Digging a lake wasn't just about digging a lake. How deep to dig it, how to dig it, how to design the waterways, all of these had to be carefully calculated. If any of these were not done well, the course would fail. Yes, digging a lake was also a subject. This course was a compulsory course for all students. Regardless of whether they were from an aristocratic family or a poor family, they had to obtain 2 innovation credits. Otherwise, even if they obtained full credits, they still wouldn't be able to graduate. It was said that the purpose of this course was to strengthen the physique of the students of the mathematics department, to train their ability to solve practical problems, to work together, to dig a lake, and so on. In any case, this was the dean's good intentions. The poor students wouldn't doubt it, and it was useless for the children of aristocratic families to doubt it. If they didn't want to dig, they could just leave. The mathematics department had no shortage of people. No one dared to disobey or look down on this young dean, because no one knew when he would recommend you for an internship. Everyone knew how dangerous it was to go out for an internship. Li Jianren lost a leg, and it was said that he almost lost his life. Chen Lisan was poisoned, and his life was hanging by a thread. He was only saved by 2 liters of feces. To him, living was probably worse than death. The others didn't end up well either. Some were sick, some were injured, and what was even more unacceptable was that they had put in so much effort, but in the end, they were still expelled from the mathematics department by Her Majesty. They would never be hired by the imperial court again. They could only be hedonistic sons for the rest of their lives, and their bright and limitless futures were ruined. Therefore, these hedonistic sons who had never suffered much in their lives could only put down their pride and dignity, dig the lake with the poor students, eat from the same pot, and sleep in the same room. As the dean of the mathematics department, Li Yi, of course, wasn't in the mathematics department. Li Han would help him supervise the digging of the lake and the classes. He was very active in these things, because if he worked hard, he would have enough holidays and enough guards. He could play wherever he wanted. For Li Han, who grew up in the palace, the outside world was infinitely attractive. These days, Li Yi was busy. Rui wasn't in a good mood, so he could only find ways to make her happy. He even went to the palace to learn a few new dishes and gave her the first string of colorful glass beads he produced. Xiao Huan and Mississippi. Lu were jealous, but he didn't give it to her for a few days. Fang walked in from the outside mysteriously. He put something covered with a red cloth on the table and asked in a low voice, "Young master, how much is this thing worth?" He lifted the red cloth, and a crystal-clear guanyin statue about a foot tall appeared in front of Li Yi. The guanyin statue was made vividly. Its facial features were clear, and its expression was very vivid. Under the sunlight, it gave people a strong visual impact. Li Yi didn't understand the market, but the more transparent something was, the more precious it was in this world. This guanyin statue, for the Buddhist believers, was definitely something worth fighting over. He originally planned to give it to the madam and didn't consider the price. But after careful consideration, the cost of this thing wasn't low. The equipment, materials, mental damage, and the old craftsman's labor cost would cost at least 1 tael of silver. Selling it for 5,000 taels of silver wouldn't be too much, right? Through what happened in the court a few days ago, he had a general understanding of the wealth of the officials in the capital. 5,000 taels of silver, there were many people in the capital who could afford it. "Young master, there are a few monks outside who want to see you. Do you want to let them?" Xiao Huan walked to the door and had just opened her mouth to speak when her gaze was attracted by the transparent guanyin statue and couldn't move away. "Monks?" A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. He said, "Let them in first." Last time, Rui said that the old monk Tan Yin had invited him to the cold mountain temple to discuss Zen, but Li Yi never went. This time, the old monk probably came looking for him. Sure enough, when a shiny head appeared in front of him, the old monk Tan Yin's face also appeared. "Amitba, young benefactor Li, long time no see." The old monk Tan Yin's smile was still so kind as he said a Buddhist greeting. "Master, long time no see." Li Yi thought to himself that whatever he needed would come. He could also ask the old monk how much this guanyin statue was worth. That way, he would have a reference price in his mind. "Master, come quickly. Help me see how much this guanyin statue is worth." The smile on Li Yi's face was very warm. He casually ordered the little servant girl, Xiao Huan, "Master Tan Yin is an honored guest. Quickly go tell the kitchen to prepare a table of good wine and good dishes, 8 meat and 8 vegetables. Remember to cut 2 tails of pig's ears, with minced garlic. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.